Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now let's begin. The autumn rain drummed against the windshield as John navigated his Ford pickup through the darkening streets of Portland. He was coming home early, a rarity in his line of work as a private investigator specializing in fraud cases. Most days stretched into 14-hour marathons of surveillance, paperwork, and client meetings. But today, something had pulled him home. An instinct, the kind that had kept him alive during his 8 years as an Army Ranger before he'd left the service after his third deployment to Afghanistan. He'd built his PI firm from nothing 5 years ago, leveraging his military investigative experience into a legitimate business. His specialty was corporate fraud, tracking down embezzlers, exposing counterfeit operations, finding people who didn't want to be found. He was good at reading people, at spotting the lies beneath polished surfaces. It was a skill that had served him well in combat, and served him even better in civilian life. James pulled into the driveway of the modest 2-story house in the suburbs. The place wasn't much, 3 bedrooms, small yard, but it was theirs. He'd bought it 3 years ago when his daughter Emma was born, wanting to give her a stable home. Something he never really had growing up in foster care, bouncing between 6 different homes before aging out of the system at 18 and enlisting. The military had been his real family. His brothers in the Rangers understood him in ways civilians never could. When he'd left the service, it had been for Emma. He'd held his newborn daughter in the hospital, this tiny, fragile thing that depended on him completely, and he'd known he couldn't keep deploying to war zones. She needed a father who came home. He met his wife, Catherine, at a community college where he'd been taking business courses after his discharge. She was a nursing student, quiet and reserved, with auburn hair and green eyes that had seemed kind. They dated for 8 months before she got pregnant. James had done what he thought was right, proposed, married her in a small ceremony, and committed to making it work. But marriage to Catherine had proven more complicated than warfare. She was distant, often cold, and increasingly dependent on her mother's opinions about everything. Eleanor Walsh, Catherine's mother, had been a constant presence in their lives from the beginning. A widow who'd lost her husband to a heart attack 10 years prior, Eleanor had latched onto her daughter's family with an intensity that made James uneasy. She criticized his choice of career, his background, his parenting style. Catherine never defended him. James pushed open the front door. The house was too quiet. "Catherine," he called out, setting his keys on the entry table. In the kitchen came his wife's flat reply. He found her standing at the sink, staring out the window at nothing. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she wore the same clothes from this morning. Emma's high chair sat empty at the table. "Where's Emma?" James asked, his instincts already prickling. "Sleeping." Finally, Catherine didn't turn around. "Your mother babysat today, right?" She volunteered. Catherine's voice carried an edge. "You know how she is? She kept calling, saying I needed a break, that she wanted to spend time with her granddaughter." James felt his jaw tighten. He'd been against it. Eleanor had specific ideas about child rearing that belonged in the 1950s, all about discipline and obedience. Emma was barely 3 years old. "How long was she here?" "Most of the day. I had that double shift at the hospital." Catherine finally turned to face him, and James saw the exhaustion in her eyes. But there was something else there too, something that looked like fear. Emma was fussy when Mom left. She wouldn't stop crying. "I want to check on her." "She's fine, James. She fell during playtime." "That's all." The words made him freeze. "Fell? What do you mean, fell?" Catherine crossed her arms defensively. "Children fall. It happens." Mom said Emma was running around and tripped over her own feet. James was already moving toward the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Emma's room was at the end of the hallway, decorated with butterflies and rainbows that he'd painted himself. He pushed open the door quietly. His daughter lay in her toddler bed, curled on her side, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched her chest. James approached slowly, his trained eyes scanning for anything out of place. Emma's breathing was even, but her face was puffy, like she'd been crying for a long time. He knelt beside the bed, and that's when he saw them. Bruises, dark purple marks on Emma's upper arm, visible where her sleeve had ridden up. The pattern was unmistakable to someone with his training. Fingerprints. Adult-sized fingerprints that had gripped hard enough to leave marks on his daughter's delicate skin. James felt something cold and dangerous unfold in his chest. He'd seen bruises like these before, during his time in the Rangers. They'd been part of his training on recognizing signs of abuse in war-torn regions. He carefully lifted the sleeve higher. For distinct marks on the outer arm, one on the inner, a thumbprint. Someone had grabbed his daughter. Hard. He checked her other arm and found similar marks, though fainter. Then he noticed the bruise on her shin, another on her shoulder blade, visible through the thin fabric of her pajamas. These weren't from falling. These were from being grabbed, shaken, or worse. James stood, his hands shaking with rage he was barely containing. He returned downstairs where Catherine was now sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone with mechanical precision. She didn't fall, James said, his voice deadly calm. Someone hurt her. Catherine's face went pale. Don't be ridiculous. Mom said, I don't care what your mother said. James moved closer, and something in his demeanor made Catherine lean back at her chair. Emma has bruises shaped like adult handprints on both arms. She has bruises on her legs and back. Someone grabbed her hard enough to leave marks. You're overreacting. Children bruise easily. I was trained to recognize signs of abuse, Catherine. This is abuse. His wife's face crumpled, and tears started flowing. You're calling my mother an abuser? How dare you? She would never hurt Emma. She loves her. Then how do you explain the bruises? I told you she fell. Emma's been clumsy lately. She probably... Catherine's voice broke. You just want to blame my mother because you've never liked her. James felt his control slipping. Your mother has been undermining me since day one. She criticizes everything I do. She thinks I'm not good enough for you or Emma. Maybe she's right. The words hung in the air between them like a grenade. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth, but it was too late. James saw the truth in her eyes. This was what she really thought. What her mother had convinced her to think. I'm taking Emma to the doctor, James said quietly. Tomorrow morning. I'm not asking permission. You can't just. She's my daughter too, Catherine. And if you try to stop me, I will remove her from this house tonight. Don't test me on this. Something in James's tone, the same voice he'd used to command men in combat, made Catherine shrink back. She nodded mutely, fresh tears streaming down her face. James didn't sleep that night. He sat in Emma's room, watching his daughter breathe, running scenarios through his mind. If Eleanor had hurt Emma, why? What had happened during those hours? And why was Catherine so desperate to defend her mother instead of protecting their daughter? By dawn, he had his phone out, scrolling through his contacts. He found Dr. Samuel Ingram's number. Sam had been his primary care physician for the past 2 years, a middle-aged man with silver hair and the kind of steady competence James respected. More importantly, Sam was a mandatory reporter. If there was abuse, Sam would know how to document it properly. Emma woke at 6:30, her usual early bird timing. But instead of her normal cheerful babbling, she was quiet. When James picked her up, she flinched, a small movement but unmistakable. Hey, Pumpkin, James said softly, his heart breaking. Daddy's here. You're safe. Emma buried her face in his shoulder, but didn't speak. Catherine appeared in the doorway, looking like she hadn't slept either. I'll take her to the appointment, James said. You go to work. I'm coming with you. No. James's tone left no room for argument. You made your choice last night. I'm handling this. He dressed Emma in a short-sleeved shirt despite the autumn chill, wanting the bruises visible. Catherine tried to protest, but James simply walked past her, carrying Emma to his truck. The pediatric clinic was busy when they arrived at 8:30. James had called ahead, requesting an urgent appointment and specifically asking for Dr. Ingram. The receptionist, a young woman named Maria, took one look at Emma's arms and immediately paged the doctor. They were brought to an exam room within 5 minutes. Dr. Samuel Ingram entered with his usual calm demeanor, but James saw his expression shift the moment he looked at Emma. The doctor's eyes went from James's face to the visible bruises on Emma's arms, and his professional mask tightened. Mr. John, Sam said carefully, tell me what happened. James explained everything. Eleanor's insistence on babysitting, Catherine's defensive reaction, the pattern of bruises he'd found. Sam listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "I need to examine her fully," Sam said. "Mr. John, would you step out for a moment?" "No." James's voice was firm. "I stay with her." Sam nodded, understanding. He called in a nurse, an older woman named Patricia who'd been with the practice for decades. Together, they conducted a thorough examination while James held Emma's hand, whispering reassurances. The bruises were worse than James had initially seen. In addition to the handprints on her arms, there were bruises on Emma's thighs, her lower back, and a particularly dark one on her ribcage. Sam's expression grew more grim with each discovery. He took photographs, measured each bruise, and documented everything in meticulous detail. "Emma," Sam said gently, kneeling to be at her eye level, "can you tell me how you got these owies?" Emma looked at her father, then back at Sam. Grandma was mad. She whispered, her voice so small James barely heard it. "Mad about what, sweetheart?" Sam asked. I spilled the juice. Grandma said I was bad." She said. Emma's lower lip trembled. "She said bad girls need to learn." James felt his blood turn to ice. Sam's face had gone completely still, the kind of stillness that came before action. "Thank you, Emma. You're very brave." Sam stood and motioned for James to follow him into the hallway, leaving Patricia with Emma. In the corridor, Sam pulled out his phone. "I'm calling CPS and the police. Those injuries are consistent with abuse, specifically violent shaking and restraint. The bruising pattern indicates she was grabbed multiple times with significant force. A fall doesn't cause injuries like that. Do what you need to do," James said, his voice hollow. His daughter had been hurt, in his own home, by someone Catherine had invited in. "There's something else," Sam said quietly, his expression troubled. "I need to be direct with you. In cases like this, CPS will investigate the entire household. That includes you and your wife." "You think I did this?" James felt rage building again. "No, but I have to tell you what's coming. They'll interview everyone. They'll look at Emma's entire history. And," Sam hesitated, "given that your wife was present in the home and didn't seek medical attention, there will be questions about her role as well." James hadn't considered that angle. Catherine's desperate defense of her mother suddenly made more sense. She was afraid, not just of the truth, but of the consequences. "Do what you need to do," James repeated. "I want whoever hurt my daughter held accountable. I don't care who it is." Sam nodded and stepped away to make his calls. James returned to the exam room, where Patricia was showing Emma a picture book, keeping her distracted. His daughter looked up at him with those big brown eyes, and James made a silent promise. "Whoever hurt you will pay. I will make sure of it." 30 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived, a female detective named Karen Martinez and her partner, a younger officer named Dan Simmons. They were from the child abuse unit, Sam explained. Detective Martinez had kind eyes, but a steel edge to her voice that James recognized from his military days. She was someone who'd seen horrors and stopped being surprised by human cruelty. "Mr. John," Detective Martinez said, "I need to ask you some questions." Officer Simmons will stay with Emma and Dr. Ingram. They moved to a private consultation room. For the next hour, James recounted everything: his marriage to Catherine, Eleanor's constant presence, the babysitting arrangement, his discovery of the bruises, Catherine's defensive reaction. Martinez took detailed notes and recorded everything. "Did you ever witness Eleanor Walsh harm Emma before yesterday?" Martinez asked. "No, but I saw red flags I ignored." James ran his hand through his hair. "Eleanor has old-fashioned ideas about discipline. She's made comments about children needing firm hands and how modern parents are too soft. I thought it was just talk. Generational differences. Has your wife ever expressed concerns about her mother's behavior around Emma?" "No. Catherine idolizes her mother. Eleanor lost her husband 10 years ago, and Catherine has been trying to fill that void ever since. She prioritizes her mother's feelings over." James paused. "Over almost everything." Martinez's expression was unreadable. "We'll need to speak with your wife and Mrs. Walsh. I'm placing an emergency protective order. Mrs. Walsh cannot have any contact with Emma until the investigation is complete. Do you understand? Yes. I'm also recommending that CPS conduct a home evaluation. They'll want to ensure Emma's living environment is safe. That's standard procedure. James nodded. He had nothing to hide. His home was clean, organized, child-proofed. He'd made sure of that when Emma was born. What came next happened quickly. Martinez and Simmons left to interview Catherine at the hospital where she worked. James took Emma home, his mind already working through scenarios. He'd build a career on investigating fraud, on finding evidence, on exposing lies. This was no different. If anything, the stakes were higher than any case he'd ever worked. He needed to know exactly what happened yesterday. He needed proof that would hold up beyond any reasonable doubt. And he needed to understand why Catherine was protecting her mother instead of their daughter. James carried Emma inside and settled her on the couch with her favorite cartoons. Then he went to his home office and opened his laptop. He'd installed a basic security system 6 months ago. Nothing fancy, just cameras at the front and back doors. He'd done it after a rash of burglaries in the neighborhood. He pulled up the footage from yesterday and watched. The camera showed Eleanor arriving at 9:15 a.m. Catherine left 10 minutes later. The front camera had a partial view into the living room through the window. James watched Eleanor interact with Emma for the first hour. Everything seemed normal. They played with blocks, read books. Then, at 11:30, Emma knocked over a cup. James couldn't hear the audio, but he saw Eleanor's body language change. She grabbed Emma's arm, the same arm with the handprint bruises, and yanked her close. Even through the window, James could see his daughter's mouth open in a cry, his hands clenched into fists. The footage showed Eleanor dragging Emma out of view, deeper into the house. For the next 20 minutes, he could occasionally see shadows moving past the window, but nothing clear. Then Emma appeared, being carried back to the couch by Eleanor. His daughter's face was blotchy and red from crying. The rest of the footage showed Emma sitting very still on the couch while Eleanor moved around the house. No more playing. No interaction. Just a frightened 3-year-old trying not to move. Catherine came home at 4:30. Eleanor left 15 minutes later, and Catherine immediately went to Emma. Even from the camera angle, James could see his wife's reaction when she saw the bruises. She'd touched Emma's arm, and Emma had pulled away. Catherine had known. She'd seen the bruises yesterday and said nothing. James saved the footage to 3 separate drives, his computer, an external hard drive, and a cloud storage account. This was evidence. This would matter. His phone rang. Detective Martinez. Mr. John, we've interviewed your wife. She's admitted that she saw bruising yesterday, but assumed Emma had fallen, as her mother reported. However, she's now questioning that account. We're bringing Mrs. Walsh in for questioning this afternoon. Good. There's something else. We spoke with Emma's daycare provider. She said that 2 weeks ago, Emma came to daycare with a bruise on her cheek. When asked, Emma said Grandma had gotten mad because she wouldn't eat her vegetables. The daycare provider noted it, but didn't report it because Emma said it was an accident. James felt sick. This had been going on longer than he'd known. What happens now? We interview Mrs. Walsh. Depending on what she says and what evidence we gather, the district attorney will decide whether to file charges. Child abuse cases are complicated, Mr. John. Even with clear evidence, proving criminal intent can be difficult. What if she admits it? Then we have a case. But in my experience, abusers rarely admit guilt. They minimize, justify, or claim the child is lying. James thanked her and hung up. Criminal charges were good, but they could take months. There might be a trial. Eleanor could hire a good lawyer and drag this out, maybe even get off with probation or community service. That wasn't enough. James John had spent 8 years learning how to neutralize threats. He'd been trained in psychological warfare, in finding an enemy's weakness and exploiting it. He'd taken those skills and built a successful business on understanding human nature's darker elements. Eleanor Walsh had hurt his daughter. Catherine had enabled it through her willful blindness. And the justice system, even with the best intentions, might not deliver adequate consequences. So James would handle it himself. Not instead of the legal system. He'd cooperate fully with the investigation. But in addition to it, he would ensure that Eleanor Walsh paid in ways the law couldn't touch. And if Catherine had known, if she'd been complicit, she'd face consequences too. He opened a new file on his computer and titled it Project Shield. Then he began to plan. The police station interview with Eleanor Walsh lasted 4 hours. James heard about it from Detective Martinez later that evening. Eleanor had come in with a lawyer, some high-priced defense attorney named Philip Crane, who specialized in defending white-collar criminals. The fact that Eleanor had immediate access to someone like that raised questions in James's mind. How did a widow on a modest retirement income afford Philip Crane? He filed that question away for later investigation. According to Martinez, Eleanor had stuck to her story. Emma had fallen multiple times during the day. She was a clumsy child, accident-prone. The bruises were unfortunate but not abuse. When confronted with the handprint patterns, Eleanor claimed she'd grabbed Emma to prevent her from falling down the stairs. When asked about Emma's statement that Grandma was mad, Eleanor said the child was confused and imaginative. Philip Crane had been smooth, Martinez said. He'd painted Eleanor as a devoted grandmother, a widow trying to help her overwhelmed daughter, a victim of a vindictive son-in-law who'd never liked her. He'd even suggested that James himself might be the abuser, trying to frame his mother-in-law to gain custody of Emma in an anticipated divorce. The accusation had been bold, calculated, and entirely expected. James had known it was coming the moment Catherine mentioned her mother had lawyered up. Eleanor was going on offense. Martinez assured James that the evidence didn't support that theory. James had been at work during the entire incident, verified by his assistant and multiple client meetings. But the suggestion alone was damaging. It would plant doubt. CPS had visited that evening. 2 social workers, an older man named Aaron Yates and a younger woman named Jennifer Pierce, conducted a thorough home inspection. They examined Emma's room, checked for safety hazards, looked through the refrigerator and pantries, interviewed James about his parenting practices. Emma had clung to James the entire time, barely speaking. The social workers noted that in their report, a child showing signs of trauma, but appearing to trust her father. They'd also noted that the home was well-maintained, appropriately child-proofed, and stocked with age-appropriate toys and books. Mr. John, Aaron had said before leaving, I'll be direct with you. The bruising pattern and Emma's statement are concerning. However, we have to investigate all possibilities. That includes your wife's role in this situation. I understand. Your wife claims she didn't realize the severity of Emma's injuries. She says she trusted her mother's explanation. Do you believe that? James had considered the question carefully. I think Catherine has spent her entire life prioritizing her mother's feelings over reality. I think she saw the bruises, felt uneasy, but convinced herself it was nothing because accepting the truth would mean confronting the fact that her mother harmed her granddaughter. That's what I think. Aaron had nodded. We'll be in touch. For now, Emma can remain in your custody. But Mrs. Walsh is prohibited from any contact, supervised or otherwise, until this investigation concludes. After they left, James put Emma to bed and returned to his office. He had work to do. He pulled up everything he could find on Eleanor Walsh. His PI resources gave him access to databases most civilians couldn't see: credit reports, property records, court filings, employment history. He began building a profile. Eleanor Christine Walsh, age 63. Maiden name, Eleanor Christine Morrison. Born in Sacramento, California. Married Robert Walsh at age 22. One child, Catherine and Walsh, now Catherine John. Robert Walsh died 10 years ago from a heart attack. At least, that was the official record. James pulled Robert Walsh's death certificate. Cause of death, acute myocardial infarction. He'd been 55 years old, seemingly healthy based on his employment records as an accountant. No history of heart disease in the family medical records James could access. Something pinged in James's investigative instincts. He dug deeper. Robert Walsh had life insurance, a substantial policy, $500,000. Eleanor had been the sole beneficiary. The payout had come 6 months after his death, following a routine investigation by the insurance company. James found the insurance investigator's report buried in public records. The investigation had been closed as a natural death, but the investigators' notes were interesting. Widow appeared emotionally detached during interview. Provided minimal information about husband's activities before death. Daughter corroborated widow's timeline, but seemed rehearsed. James felt the familiar tingle of connecting dots. He pulled up news articles from around Robert Walsh's death. There had been a small obituary in the local paper. Standard fare, loving husband and father, survived by his wife and daughter. Memorial service at St. Augustine's Church. But then James found something else. A letter to the editor in the same paper, published 3 weeks after Robert's death. It was from a woman named Patricia Morrison, Eleanor's sister. The letter was brief but pointed. My brother-in-law Robert Walsh was a good man who deserved better than he received. The truth has a way of emerging, even when people try to bury it. Justice delayed is not justice denied. James's pulse quickened. He searched for Patricia Morrison and found her living in Seattle. He noted her address and phone number. This was a thread worth pulling, but he needed more immediate evidence for the current situation. He reviewed the security footage again, this time analyzing Eleanor's body language with the trained eye of someone who'd interrogated enemy combatants. Her rage when Emma spilled the juice wasn't proportional to the incident. It was the rage of someone with control issues, someone who saw any deviation from their expectations as a personal affront. James had seen that kind of rage before. It was the mindset of abusers. Everything is about them, about their authority, their rules. Children aren't individuals with needs. They're objects that must obey. His phone buzzed. Catherine. He let go to voicemail. She called again immediately. He answered. James, please. His wife's voice was thick with tears. We need to talk. About what? About everything. The police, CPS, they're saying terrible things about my mother. They think she hurt Emma on purpose. That's insane. You know that's insane. I know what I saw, Catherine. I know what Emma told the doctor. I know what the evidence shows. Evidence can be misinterpreted. Mom grabbed Emma to keep her from falling. That's not abuse. That's protection. James closed his eyes, fighting for patience. Catherine, I pulled our security footage. I watched what happened. Your mother grabbed Emma in anger, not protection. She dragged her out of view of the camera. Emma came back crying, and then sat like a statue for hours because she was terrified. Silence on the other end. Then, you have footage? Yes. And I've given it to the police. How could you? Catherine's voice broke. You're trying to destroy my mother. You've always hated her, and now you're using this to what? To protect our daughter? Yes, Catherine. That's exactly what I'm doing. I want to come home. I want to see Emma. No, you can't keep me from my daughter. Actually, I can. CPS recommended that Emma's environment remains stable right now. You chose to defend your mother instead of our daughter. You saw those bruises and said nothing. You're complicit, Catherine. I didn't know. I thought. You thought wrong. And until you can put Emma's safety above your mother's feelings, you're not coming back here. He hung up before she could respond. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the cold fury that had taken root in his chest. Catherine had seen the bruises. She'd known something was wrong. But instead of protecting Emma, she'd protected Eleanor. That was unforgivable. James spent the rest of the night gathering information. He called in a favor from a former Army buddy, Marcus Reynolds, who worked in hospital administration. Within 2 hours, Marcus had sent him copies of Eleanor's medical records, obtained through methods James knew better than to ask about. What he found was illuminating. Eleanor had a history of psychological treatment dating back 30 years. Depression, anxiety, and something else, narcissistic personality traits with potential for intermittent explosive disorder. The diagnosis had been made by 3 separate psychiatrists over the years. She'd been prescribed mood stabilizers and anger management counseling. James cross-referenced the dates. Eleanor had stopped taking her medication 5 years ago, right around the time Catherine had gotten pregnant. She'd also stopped attending therapy. He had his psychological profile now. Eleanor Walsh was a narcissist with anger issues who decided she didn't need treatment. She saw her granddaughter as an extension of herself, something to control and mold. When Emma defied that control, even accidentally, Eleanor reacted with violence. And Catherine, raised by this woman, had been conditioned to enable her mother's behavior, to make excuses, to prioritize Eleanor's emotional state over reality. James leaned back in his chair, his mind assembling pieces of a plan. The legal system would do its part. CPS was investigating, the police had evidence, the district attorney would likely file charges. But that could take months, and the outcome was uncertain. Philip Crane was an expensive lawyer for a reason. James needed to ensure Eleanor's punishment was swift, certain, and comprehensive. He needed to destroy her reputation, her credibility, and her ability to ever harm another child. He needed to make her pay in ways that would hurt worse than any jail sentence. And he knew exactly how to do it. The next morning, James made 3 phone calls. The first was to Patricia Morrison in Seattle. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. "Ms. Morrison, my name is James John. I'm your sister Eleanor's son-in-law." A long pause. "I don't speak to my sister." "I know. I'm not calling on her behalf. I'm calling because I believe she hurt my 3-year-old daughter. The police are investigating. I found your letter to the editor about Robert's death, and I need to know what you meant by it." Another pause, longer this time. "Then, come to Seattle. We should talk in person. There are things about Eleanor that you need to know. Things I should have said years ago. I'll be there tomorrow." The second call was to his assistant, Lonnie Anderson, a former Marine who'd worked with James since the PI firm's inception. Lonnie was 52, grizzled, and utterly loyal. He'd been James's sergeant in the Rangers and had followed him into civilian life. "Lonnie, I need you to run a full background check on Eleanor Christine Walsh. Go deep, financials, associates, employment history, medical records if you can get them. I need everything." "What am I looking for, boss?" "Anything that doesn't add up. Criminal history, civil suits, complaints, anything that shows a pattern of violence or abuse." "You got it. This related to Emma?" "Yes." "Then I'll work fast. Nobody hurts a kid on my watch." The third call was to a journalist named Frankie Pruitt who worked for the Portland Tribune. James had helped Frankie break a major fraud story 2 years ago, exposing a Ponzi scheme that had stolen millions from retirees. Frankie owed him. "James John, what can I do for you?" "I need your help with a story. Child abuse case involving my daughter. The abuser is my mother-in-law, and she's lawyered up with Philip Crane." "Philip Crane? That's interesting. He doesn't usually take child abuse cases. Not enough money in them. Who's paying his fee?" "That's one of the things I need you to investigate. Eleanor Walsh is a retired school administrator living on a pension. She shouldn't be able to afford Crane. So where's the money coming from?" "I'll dig. What else?" "I want this case in the public eye. Not sensationalized, just facts. A grandmother who abused her granddaughter, an enabler mother, and a justice system that might let her walk." "Can you do that? With your evidence?" "Absolutely. Send me everything you've got." James spent the morning with Emma, trying to restore some normalcy. They made pancakes together, played with her dolls, read her favorite stories. She was still quiet, still clingy, but slowly starting to smile again. It broke his heart and strengthened his resolve in equal measure. Detective Martinez called at noon with an update. "The DA is filing charges against Eleanor Walsh, 2 counts of felony child abuse. The arraignment is tomorrow. Given the severity of the injuries and her access to your family, we're asking for high bail." "What about Catherine?" "We're still investigating her role. Right now, it looks like negligence rather than active participation, but that could change. She's cooperating with the investigation, which helps her case." After hanging up, James received a text from Catherine. "Please let me see Emma. I need to know she's okay. I'm her mother." He replied, "She's safe. That's all you need to know right now. When you're ready to prioritize her over your mother, we'll talk." She didn't respond. That evening, Lonnie called with preliminary findings. "Boss, Eleanor Walsh has a history. 3 complaints filed against her when she was an elementary school principal in Sacramento. All from parents claiming she'd been too harsh with their children, excessive punishments, verbal abuse, one claim of grabbing a student roughly." "What happened with those complaints?" "School district investigated. No formal findings. Eleanor retired shortly after the 3rd complaint, took her full pension and moved to Oregon. But I talked to one of the parents who filed, a woman named Sandra Briggs. She said Eleanor grabbed her daughter so hard it left bruises just like Emma's. The school made it go away quietly. James felt his jaw clench. Eleanor has a pattern. Looks that way. I'm still digging in her finances, but something's off. She's been receiving regular payments from an LLC called Cascade Holdings. Monthly deposits of $3,000 for the past 5 years. Find out who owns Cascade Holdings. Already on it. James flew to Seattle the next morning, arranging for his neighbor, a retired teacher named Martha, who Emma adored, to watch his daughter. Martha had been horrified when James explained what happened and had immediately volunteered to help. Patricia Morrison lived in a modest house in a quiet Seattle suburb. She was in her early 60s, with gray hair and Eleanor's same sharp features, but her eyes held warmth that her sisters lacked. "Come in," she said, studying James with careful assessment. "You have a military bearing. Former service. Army Rangers. Good. You'll need that strength for what I'm about to tell you." She led him to a living room filled with books and photographs. "My sister Eleanor has been broken for a long time. I try to help her, but some people don't want help. They want control instead. Tell me about Robert's death." Patricia's expression hardened. "My brother-in-law didn't die of a heart attack. Not naturally anyway. Eleanor poisoned him. Slowly, over months. I couldn't prove it then, but I've always known." James felt ice in his veins. "Why do you think that?" "Robert started getting sick about a year before he died. Fatigue, nausea, heart palpitations. Doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. He'd been healthy his whole life. Then one day, he collapsed and died. The autopsy showed acute heart failure, but the toxicology screen was basic. They didn't test for everything. Why would Eleanor kill him? Because he was going to leave her. He'd found out about her abuse of Catherine when Catherine was child. Eleanor had hidden it well, but Robert discovered old medical records, talked to Catherine's childhood friends. He was going to divorce her and take Catherine with him, even though she was already an adult. He wanted to get Catherine away from Eleanor's influence and into therapy. And Eleanor found out. Robert confronted her the week before he got sick. I know because he called me. He said Eleanor had been eerily calm about the whole thing, accepting. That should have been the warning sign. Eleanor never accepts anything that threatens her control. Patricia pulled out an old photo album. Look at these pictures of Catherine growing up. See how she's always standing slightly behind Eleanor? How she's never quite smiling. That's a child who's been beaten into submission, emotionally if not physically. Robert didn't see it until it was too late. James studied the photos. Catherine as a child did look subdued, overly compliant. Nothing like the vibrant children he'd seen in other family photos. After Robert died, I tried to get Catherine away from Eleanor, Patricia continued. I offered to let her live with me, to pay for college somewhere far away. But Eleanor had such a grip on her. Catherine couldn't see that her mother was toxic. She just saw a widow who needed her daughter. Do you have any evidence of the poisoning? Medical records, anything? I kept Robert's medical files. All of them. I knew someday it would matter. She handed James a thick folder. The symptoms are consistent with chronic poisoning, antifreeze, or arsenic. But without a proper toxicology screening, it's just suspicion. James flipped through the records, his investigative mind cataloging details. Patricia, I need to ask you something. If you suspected Eleanor killed her husband, why didn't you push harder for an investigation? I did. The police looked into it briefly, but Eleanor had an alibi for the day Robert died. She was at work. The insurance company investigated too, but found nothing concrete. And Catherine backed up every one of Eleanor's lies. What was I supposed to do? I had no proof, and my own niece was defending her potential murderer. I can use this, James said. Not to prove murder. The statute of limitations and lack of evidence make that impossible. But to establish a pattern of violence and control. To show that Eleanor Walsh is dangerous. Then use it. And James. Patricia's eyes were fierce. Make her pay for what she's done. Not just to Emma, but to Robert, to Catherine, to all the children she hurt over the years. She's been getting away with it for too long. James left Seattle with a clear picture. Eleanor Walsh was a narcissistic abuser who'd spent decades hurting people. She'd likely killed her husband when he threatened her control. She'd abused her daughter psychologically, conditioning Catherine into a perfect enabler. and now she graduated to physically abusing her granddaughter. But Eleanor had made a fatal mistake. She'd hurt James, John's daughter. And James was not Robert Walsh. He wouldn't confront her and wait for her to strike back. He would dismantle her completely, systematically, using every skill he'd learned in 8 years of military service and 5 years as a private investigator. Eleanor Walsh thought she'd gotten away with her crimes. She was wrong. The arraignment was held the following afternoon. James sat in the courtroom gallery, watching as Eleanor was led in by bailiffs. She wore a conservative navy suit, her silver hair perfectly styled, her expression one of wounded dignity. She dressed to look like a victim. Philip Crane stood beside her, equally polished in his expensive suit. The lawyer projected confidence and righteous indignation, as if his client were being persecuted rather than prosecuted. Judge Richard Castellano presided, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for being tough on child abuse cases. The prosecutor was an assistant DA named Michelle Torres, a woman in her 40s who specialized in crimes against children. James had done his research on her. She had a 90% conviction rate. Torres stood and presented the charges, 2 counts of felony child abuse. She detailed Emma's injuries with clinical precision, describing the bruising patterns, Emma's statement to Dr. Ingram, and the security footage showing Eleanor grabbing Emma in anger. Your Honor, Torres said, the defendant has shown no remorse and has actively worked to cover up her abuse. She coached the child's mother to lie about the injuries. She immediately retained expensive legal counsel and has been spreading false allegations against the child's father to deflect attention from her own actions. We request bail be set at $150,000. Crane stood smoothly. Your Honor, this is a gross overreaction to a tragic misunderstanding. Mrs. Walsh is a 63-year-old widow with no criminal record. She has deep ties to the community and poses no flight risk. The alleged abuse consists of a grandmother grabbing her granddaughter to prevent her from falling downstairs. The child's father, motivated by personal animus toward my client, has twisted this innocent act into something sinister. Judge Castellano looked unimpressed. Mr. Crane, I've reviewed the medical reports and the photographic evidence. Those injuries are not consistent with someone being caught before a fall. They're consistent with forceful, repeated gripping. Bail is set at $100,000. Mrs. Walsh is prohibited from any contact with a minor child or any children under the age of 18. Next court date is set for preliminary hearing in 3 weeks. Eleanor's mask slipped for just a moment. James saw rage flash across her face before she controlled it. Crane whispered something to her, and she nodded, the wounded grandmother expression returning. James left the courthouse before Eleanor was released on bail. He had no doubt she'd made the payment. Whoever was funding her defense would ensure she stayed out of jail. But at least there were restrictions now. She couldn't get near Emma. His phone rang as he reached his truck. Lonnie, boss, I found out who owns Cascade Holdings. You're going to want to sit down for this. Just tell me. It's Philip Crane. He owns the LLC. He's been paying Eleanor $3,000 a month for the past 5 years. James felt the pieces falling into place. Why would Crane be paying Eleanor? I don't know yet, but I'm digging. There's got to be a connection. Maybe she worked for him. Maybe she has something on him. Keep investigating. And Lonnie? Be careful. If Crane finds out we're looking into him, he'll come after us. Let him try. James drove home, his mind working through the implications. Philip Crane wasn't just Eleanor's lawyer. He was her benefactor. But why? What connected a high-powered defense attorney to a retired school administrator? There had to be something more. He spent that evening reviewing everything he'd gathered. The security footage, Emma's medical records, the photos of her injuries, Robert Walsh's medical history, Patricia Morrison's testimony, Eleanor's employment complaints, and now the financial connection to Philip Crane. Separately, each piece was concerning. Together, they painted a picture of a woman who'd been hurting people for decades and had powerful protection enabling her to continue. But James had one advantage. He'd been trained to fight asymmetrical warfare. He didn't need to match Crane's resources. He just needed to exploit vulnerabilities and strike where the enemy was weakest. His phone buzzed. A text from Frankie Pruitt. Check tomorrow's Tribune. Front page, above the fold. You're going to like it. James smiled grimly. Phase 1 was beginning. The next morning, the Portland Tribune ran a detailed article about Emma's case. Frankie had done excellent work. The piece was factual, well-sourced, and devastating. It included photos of Emma's injuries, with her face blurred for privacy, excerpt from Dr. Ingram's medical report, details about the security footage, and the charges filed against Eleanor. But the most damaging part was the sidebar article Frankie had written, Pattern of Abuse, Retired Principal's History of Complaints. It detailed the 3 incidents from Eleanor's time in Sacramento, including interviews with Sandra Briggs about how her daughter had been grabbed and bruised by Principal Walsh. The article also raised questions about Philip Crane's involvement and the mysterious funding of Eleanor's defense. How does a widow on a modest pension afford one of Portland's most expensive defense attorneys? The article asked. Follow the money, and you might find uncomfortable answers. James's phone started ringing within an hour of the article hitting newsstands. Local news stations wanted interviews. Other parents from Eleanor's school days came forward with their own stories of harsh treatment. The internet picked up the story, and by afternoon, #JusticeForEmma was trending on social media. Eleanor Walsh's reputation was being destroyed in real time, and there was nothing Philip Crane could do to stop it. Truth was a powerful weapon. Detective Martinez called that afternoon. Your journalist friend did quite a number. Eleanor's lawyer is claiming media bias and prejudicial coverage, but the damage is done. We've had 6 more calls from parents who say Eleanor hurt their children years ago. We're reopening investigations into all of them. Good. There's something else. We looked into Philip Crane, like you suggested. Turns out he and Eleanor's late husband Robert went to college together. They were friends, apparently, though they'd lost touch over the years. Then about 5 years ago, Crane started sending Eleanor monthly payments. Why? We don't know yet, but we're looking. If there's a quid pro quo arrangement, if Eleanor has information Crane wants kept quiet, that's attorney misconduct at minimum. Could be criminal conspiracy. James felt satisfaction settling in his chest. Keep me updated. That evening, Catherine showed up at his door. She looked terrible. Unwashed hair, dark circles under her eyes, clothes rumpled. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice hoarse. James let her in, but didn't invite her to sit. What do you want? I read the article. I saw what other parents said about my mother. About how she hurt their children, too. Catherine's face crumpled. James, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was like this. You knew she grabbed Emma hard enough to bruise her. You saw that with your own eyes, and you said nothing. I was scared. My whole life, I've been taught that my mother is always right, that questioning her is being disloyal. When I saw the bruises, part of me knew something was wrong, but I couldn't accept that my mother would hurt Emma. So you chose your mother over our daughter. I made a mistake. Catherine was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. I know I failed Emma. I failed you. But I'm here now, and I want to make it right. I'll testify against my mother. I'll tell the police everything. Just please let me see Emma. James studied his wife, really studied her. He saw a woman who'd been psychologically abused for so long, she didn't know what normal looked like. He saw someone who'd been conditioned to enable a monster. Part of him felt pity for Catherine, but a larger part felt cold fury at her failure to protect their daughter. You can see Emma, he said finally. Supervised visits with me present, and only if you agree to go into therapy immediately. Real therapy with someone who specializes in childhood abuse and family dynamics. I'll do anything. And Catherine, if you ever choose your mother over Emma again, I will divorce you and fight for full custody. Do you understand me? She nodded, still crying. I understand. And James? I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry. He let her sit with Emma for an hour, watching carefully. Emma was hesitant at first, but gradually warmed to her mother. Catherine was gentle, apologetic, clearly trying to rebuild trust. It was a start, just a start. After Catherine left, James returned to his office and pulled up the files Lonnie had sent. His assistant had been busy. Lonnie had found connection between Philip Crane and Robert Walsh that went deeper than college friendship. 25 years ago, Crane had been investigated for witness tampering in a high-profile murder case. The investigation had been dropped due to lack of evidence, but the prosecutor at the time had been vocal about believing Crane was guilty. That prosecutor's name was Robert Walsh, before he'd retired from the DA's office to become an accountant. James felt electricity running through his veins. Robert Walsh had investigated Philip Crane. Then, years later, after Robert's death, Crane had started paying Eleanor monthly stipends and was now defending her against child abuse charges. The question was, what did Eleanor have on Crane? What was Robert Walsh investigating that had come into Eleanor's possession after his death? James called Lonnie. I need you to get into Robert Walsh's old case files. Everything he worked on involving Philip Crane. There's something there, something Eleanor is using as leverage. That's going to be hard to access. Those files are sealed. Then unseal them. Call in favors. Do what you have to do. You got it, boss. Next, James called Patricia Morrison again. Patricia, did Robert ever mention Philip Crane? The lawyer? Yes, actually. Robert was obsessed with him near the end. He said Crane was dirty, that he'd tampered with witnesses and evidence in multiple cases, but was too clever to get caught. Robert had been building a case against him when he was at the DA's office, but his superiors shut it down. Political pressure. Did Robert keep files on Crane? I don't know. If he did, Eleanor would have them now. She kept all of Robert's personal effects after he died. James thanked her and hung up. The picture was complete now. Robert Walsh had been investigating Philip Crane. When Robert died, Eleanor inherited his files. She'd used whatever evidence Robert had gathered as leverage, paying Crane through blackmail disguised as monthly consulting fees. And when Eleanor got arrested for child abuse, she'd called in her marker. Crane had to defend her because she had evidence that could destroy his career or worse. James had found the vulnerability he needed. If he could get Robert Walsh's files, he could expose both Eleanor and Crane simultaneously. It would destroy Eleanor's defense, remove her protection, and ensure she faced the full consequences of her actions. But getting those files meant breaking into Eleanor's house. It meant taking a risk that could backfire spectacularly if he got caught. James John had spent 8 years in the Rangers taking calculated risks. This was just another mission. The stakes were higher, his daughter's safety, his family's future, but the principle was the same. Sometimes you had to go into enemy territory to complete the objective. He began planning the operation. James spent 3 days conducting surveillance on Eleanor's house. She lived in a 2-story colonial in an upscale neighborhood, the kind of place where neighbors minded their own business. The house had a basic security system. James recognized the model from his home inspection work. It was old, easily bypassed. Eleanor's pattern was predictable. She left the house twice a day, morning grocery store runs and evening walks in the park. Her morning outings lasted about an hour. That would be his window. He waited until the following Monday morning. Eleanor left at 9:30, right on schedule. James, wearing dark clothes and gloves, approached from the backyard, using the fence line to stay out of sight of neighboring houses. The security system was disabled within 90 seconds. He learned these skills in the Rangers, where breaking into enemy compounds was part of the job. He entered through the back door, moving quickly but carefully. The house smelled like lavender and something else, something chemical, harsh. James moved through the first floor, noting the immaculate condition. Everything was perfectly arranged, not a single item out of place. It was the home of someone with severe control issues. He headed upstairs to Eleanor's bedroom. If she'd kept Robert's files, they'd be somewhere personal, somewhere she could access them easily, but where visitors wouldn't stumble across them. The bedroom was as tidy as the rest of the house. James checked the closet first. Nothing but clothes and shoes organized by color and season. He checked under the bed, behind furniture, inside dresser drawers. Then he found it. In the back of Eleanor's closet, hidden behind a false panel in the wall, was a small safe. James smiled grimly. A hidden safe meant something valuable was inside, valuable enough to hide from the world. The safe was a standard combination lock model. James had tools in his pocket designed for this exact scenario. It took him 15 minutes to crack it, longer than he wanted, but he had time. Inside the safe were documents, photographs, and 3 USB drives. James pulled everything out, spreading it across Eleanor's bed. The documents were damning. Robert Walsh had compiled extensive evidence of Philip Crane's witness tampering over a 15-year period. Names, dates, payments, recorded conversations. Robert had been thorough, building a case that would have destroyed Crane's career and potentially sent him to prison. There were also personal notes in Robert's handwriting. Eleanor knows about the investigation. She's threatened to tell Catherine everything about her childhood abuse if I proceed. She's using Catherine as a hostage. James felt his jaw clench. Robert had been caught in an impossible situation. Expose Crane and risk Eleanor revealing the abuse to Catherine, potentially destroying their father-daughter relationship. Or stay silent and let Crane continue corrupting the justice system. Robert had chosen silence to protect his daughter, and Eleanor had killed him for it anyway, then used his evidence to blackmail Crane. James photographed every document with his phone, copied the USB drives onto a portable hard drive he brought, then carefully returned everything to the safe. He locked it and replaced the false panel, ensuring nothing looked disturbed. He was out of the house in 40 minutes, well before Eleanor's expected return. Back in his truck, James felt grim satisfaction. He had everything he needed. The evidence would destroy Crane's legal career and expose Eleanor's decades of manipulation and murder. It would ensure that when she was convicted of child abuse, the judge would see the full picture of who she was. But James wasn't going to turn this over to the police. Not yet. If he did that, Crane would find a way to make it inadmissible fruit of the poisonous tree, illegally obtained, something. No, James needed to be smarter. He needed to let Crane and Eleanor destroy themselves. He called Frankie Pruitt. I'm sending you documents. Don't ask me how I got them. They're evidence that Philip Crane has been tampering with witnesses for over a decade, and that Eleanor Walsh has been blackmailing him with this information. Jesus, James, this is Pulitzer-worthy? Yeah, I know, but you can't publish yet. I need you to sit on it for 2 weeks. Can you do that? Why? Because I'm going to give Crane and Eleanor enough rope to hang themselves. When they do, you'll have the full story, not just the evidence, but the cover-up attempt, the conspiracy, everything. Trust me. Frankie was quiet for a moment. 2 weeks. Then I'm running it whether you're ready or not. Deal. Next, James created an anonymous email account and sent copies of the documents to the Oregon State Bar Association with a note. Philip Crane is being blackmailed by his current client, Eleanor Walsh. He has been receiving monthly payments from her for 5 years in exchange for legal services and silence about his past witness tampering. Attached is evidence compiled by former prosecutor Robert Walsh. The State Bar would have to investigate. Even if they kept it quiet initially, the investigation would create pressure on Crane. Then James sent another copy to Detective Martinez with a different note. Eleanor Walsh murdered her husband Robert using slow poisoning. Robert had been investigating Philip Crane for corruption. Eleanor blackmailed Crane after Robert's death. She's currently using Crane's fear of exposure to escape justice for child abuse. Martinez would investigate. She'd have to. Finally, James made copies and sent them to 3 different attorneys, rivals of Crane who would love to see him taken down. He included detailed instructions for how to verify the evidence and suggested they prepare ethics complaints. The trap was set. Within days, Crane would know his blackmail scheme was exposed. He'd have to choose between protecting himself or protecting Eleanor. And James knew what choice Crane would make. Every time, people chose self-preservation. Eleanor's lawyer would abandon her. And without Crane's expensive defense, Eleanor would face justice with a public defender who couldn't prevent the full weight of her crimes from crushing her. Over the next week, things progressed exactly as James had predicted. The State Bar opened a formal investigation into Crane. The attorney immediately moved to withdraw from Eleanor's case, citing irreconcilable differences with the client. Eleanor was forced to hire a new attorney, a criminal defense lawyer named Thomas Mercer, who specialized in domestic violence cases. Mercer was competent, but not in Crane's league. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 days later. James attended, sitting in the gallery with Emma's medical records and security footage ready to provide if needed. Eleanor looked different now. The polished grandmother facade was cracking. She appeared haggard, angry, barely able to maintain composure. When she saw James in the courtroom, her eyes burned with pure hatred. Judge Castellano reviewed the evidence presented by Prosecutor Torres. Dr. Ingram testified about Emma's injuries. Detective Martinez testified about the investigation, the security footage, Emma's statements. Catherine testified, her voice shaking, about seeing the bruises and failing to report them. Then Patricia Morrison testified. She explained Eleanor's history of abuse, the suspicious death of Robert Walsh, the pattern of violence that had followed Eleanor throughout her life. Thomas Mercer tried to object, tried to exclude the testimony as prejudicial, but Judge Castellano allowed it. The defendant's history of violence is relevant to establishing pattern of behavior, he ruled. At the end of the preliminary hearing, Judge Castellano bound Eleanor over for trial. The evidence presented is substantial and credible. This case will proceed to trial. Mrs. Walsh, you remain released on bail with the condition that you have no contact with minors. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Frankie Pruitt's follow-up articles had turned this into a major story. Eleanor was a pariah now, her name synonymous with child abuse and murder. James stood on the courthouse steps and gave a brief statement. My daughter was hurt by someone who should have protected her. I'm grateful that the justice system is holding that person accountable. No child should suffer what Emma suffered. The clip played on every local news station that evening. The trial was set for 6 weeks later. In that time, James continued rebuilding his family. Catherine was seeing a therapist twice a week, working through the psychological damage Eleanor had inflicted over decades. She was beginning to understand how her mother had manipulated her, how the abuse she'd suffered as a child had conditioned her to enable Eleanor's violence. It was painful to watch, but necessary. Catherine needed to break free from her mother's influence completely. Emma was also in therapy, working with a child psychologist named Dr. Rachel Kim, who specialized in trauma. Emma was slowly returning to her normal self, laughing, playing, showing affection. The nightmares were decreasing. She still asked about Grandma, sometimes, but Dr. Kim said that was normal. Children wanted to make sense of why someone they loved had hurt them. James focused on being present, being stable, being the father Emma needed. He took time off from work, spending days building blanket forts and playing imagination games and reading stories until his voice was hoarse. One evening, as he tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at him with those big brown eyes. Daddy, yeah, Pumpkin, are you going to keep me safe? The question broke his heart. Always, he said firmly. I will always keep you safe. That's a promise. Even from Grandma, especially from Grandma. She can never hurt you again. Emma nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes. James sat beside her bed until she fell asleep, his mind already moving toward the trial. Eleanor's new lawyer, Thomas Mercer, had filed multiple motions trying to exclude evidence, the security footage, Emma's statements to Dr. Ingram, Patricia Morrison's testimony. Judge Castellano denied them all. Mercer also tried to negotiate a plea deal. Prosecutor Michelle Torres refused. Your client has shown no remorse, Torres said in a hearing James attended. She's maintained her innocence despite overwhelming evidence. She deserves trial and the maximum sentence. As the trial date approached, Lonnie provided James with one final piece of information. Boss, you're going to want to hear this. I found out why Eleanor killed Robert. It wasn't just because he was going to divorce her. What was it? Robert had a life insurance policy with a suicide clause. If he died by suicide within 2 years of taking out the policy, Eleanor wouldn't get the payout. But Robert had updated the policy 6 months before he died, increasing the payout to $500,000. Eleanor needed him to die of natural causes to collect. She killed him for money and control. Robert was going to expose her abuse of Catherine. Eleanor couldn't allow that. So she poisoned him, made it look like a heart attack, and collected $500,000. James felt cold rage settling over him. Eleanor Walsh had murdered her husband, abused her daughter, and traumatized her granddaughter, all in service of her need for control and financial security. She deserved everything that was coming to her. The trial began on a Monday morning in late November. The courthouse was packed with journalists, advocates, and members of the public who'd followed the case. James sat in the front row, Catherine beside him, both of them prepared to testify. Prosecutor Torres delivered an opening statement that was clinical and devastating. She laid out the timeline of events, the medical evidence, the security footage, Emma's statements. She explained the pattern of abuse going back decades. She painted a picture of a woman who'd spent her life hurting children and had finally been caught. Thomas Mercer's opening statement was defensive and weak. He argued that Eleanor was a loving grandmother who'd made a mistake, that the grabbing had been to prevent Emma from falling, that the bruising was unfortunate but not criminal. He tried to cast doubt on James's motives, suggesting this was about a custody dispute. The jury looked skeptical. Over the next 3 days, Torres presented her case with precision. Dr. Ingram testified about Emma's injuries, explaining in medical detail why they were inconsistent with accidental falling. Detective Martinez testified about the investigation and the security footage, which was played in court. When the footage showed Eleanor grabbing Emma in rage, James heard gasps from the gallery. One juror wiped her eyes. Catherine testified next, her voice shaking but clear. I saw the bruises when my mother left that day. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't accept it. I've been taught my entire life never to question my mother. I failed my daughter, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Patricia Morrison testified about Eleanor's history, about Robert's death, about the decades of abuse and manipulation. Then, on the 4th day, James testified. Mr. John, Torres said, tell the jury what you saw when you examined your daughter that evening. James looked directly at Eleanor as he spoke. I saw bruises shaped like handprints on both of Emma's arms. I saw bruises on her legs, her back, her ribs. I saw a child who'd been hurt by someone she trusted. What did you do? I took her to the doctor. I gathered evidence. I made sure that whoever hurt my daughter would face consequences. Why did you feel the need to gather evidence yourself? Because I've spent years as an investigator learning that the truth doesn't always come out on its own. Sometimes you have to fight for it. My daughter couldn't fight for herself, so I fought for her. Torres presented the security footage again, this time with James narrating what he saw. Eleanor's rage, the grab, the dragging, Emma's fear. When Torres finished, Mercer stood for cross-examination. Mr. John, you don't like your mother-in-law, do you? No, I don't. You've argued with her frequently about parenting styles? Yes. Isn't it true that you've been looking for a reason to remove her from your family's life? James kept his voice level. I've been looking to protect my daughter. If Eleanor had never hurt Emma, she could have been part of our lives. She made the choice to be violent. That's on her, not me. Mercer tried a few more angles, but couldn't shake James's testimony. The evidence was too strong. The defense's case was brief. Eleanor didn't testify. Mercer knew putting her on the stand would be disastrous. Instead, he called character witnesses who testified that Eleanor had been a good principal, a devoted mother, a pillar of the community. Torres destroyed each witness on cross-examination, getting them to admit they'd never seen Eleanor alone with children for extended periods, never witnessed her discipline techniques, never knew about the complaints filed against her. After 3 days of defense testimony, both sides rested. Closing arguments were scheduled for the following Monday. That weekend, James received a call from an unknown number. He answered cautiously. James John. The voice was Eleanor's, cold and controlled. I know what you did. Breaking into my house, stealing Robert's files, destroying my life. You think you've won? James felt his pulse quicken, but kept his voice calm. I didn't break into anything. But even if I had, what would you do about it? You're on trial for child abuse. Your reputation is destroyed. Your lawyer abandoned you. You have no leverage. I still have Catherine. Catherine is done protecting you. She's in therapy dealing with the psychological damage you caused. You've lost her. I could tell her things. Things about Robert. Things that would destroy her. Tell her. She knows you're a liar and a murderer. Nothing you say matters anymore. Eleanor's voice dropped to a hiss. You don't understand what you've done. I'm not someone across. I've destroyed bigger men than you. No, Eleanor. You've hurt vulnerable people, children, a husband who trusted you, a daughter you conditioned to be weak. You've never faced someone who fights back. And that's why you're losing. I will make you pay. You can't. You're powerless now. And in a few days, a jury is going to convict you. You're going to prison, Eleanor. And you'll die there, forgotten and alone. He hung up before she could respond. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and cold rain. James walked into the courthouse with Catherine, both of them ready for the final phase. Torres's closing argument was powerful and emotional. She recapped the evidence, showed photos of Emma's bruises, played portions of the security footage. She reminded the jury of Patricia Morrison's testimony, of Eleanor's pattern of violence, of the decades of hurt she'd caused. Eleanor Walsh is not a loving grandmother, Torres said. She's an abuser who's been getting away with it for decades. Emma John is not her only victim, but she can be her last. You have the power to hold Eleanor Walsh accountable, to say that hurting children is unacceptable, that abuse will not be tolerated, that justice will be served. I'm asking you to convict her on both counts of felony child abuse. Mercer's closing was defensive and desperate. He argued that reasonable doubt existed, that maybe Eleanor had grabbed Emma too hard but without intent to harm, that this was a family tragedy being criminalized. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and announced, guilty on both counts of felony child abuse. James felt Catherine grab his hand, sobbing. He kept his eyes on Eleanor, watching her face as the verdict was read. For just a moment, the mask fell away completely, and he saw pure rage and hatred. Then the bailiffs were leading her away in handcuffs. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. The conviction felt like vindication, but James knew it wasn't over yet. The sentencing hearing was packed with people affected by Eleanor's decades of abuse. Sandra Briggs was there, along with 4 other parents whose children had been hurt by Principal Walsh years ago. Patricia Morrison attended, sitting beside Catherine. Judge Castellano reviewed the pre-sentence report, which detailed Eleanor's lack of remorse, her history of violence, and the psychological damage she'd caused to multiple victims. Mrs. Walsh, the judge said, "Do you have anything to say before I impose sentence?" Eleanor stood, and for a moment James thought she might finally show remorse. Instead, she said, "I have been wrongly convicted by a system that doesn't understand discipline and proper child rearing. I did nothing wrong. History will vindicate me." Judge Castellano's expression hardened. History will remember you as someone who hurt vulnerable children and showed no remorse for it. Mrs. Walsh, I'm sentencing you to 15 years in state prison on each count to run consecutively. That's 30 years total. Given your age, this is effectively a life sentence. The gallery erupted in quiet sobs and gasps. 30 years. Eleanor would be 93 years old if she survived the full sentence. Eleanor's face went white, then red with rage. "You can't, this is—" Bailiffs, remove the defendant. As Eleanor was led away, she turned and looked directly at James. The hatred in her eyes was palpable, but beneath it, James saw something else: defeat. She knew she'd lost completely. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again. James gave another brief statement. "Justice was served today. My daughter is safe, and Eleanor Walsh can never hurt another child. That's all that matters." Frankie Pruitt's final article ran the next day, exposing Philip Crane's blackmail scheme and his connection to Eleanor. The Oregon State Bar formally disbarred Crane, and the DA opened a criminal investigation into his witness tampering. Crane's career and reputation were destroyed. Eleanor's assets were seized to pay restitution to her victims. The house she'd lived in was sold. The money from Robert's life insurance, blood money from a murder, was divided among the families she'd harmed. Catherine filed for divorce from Eleanor's influence completely, legally changing her name back to her maiden name and cutting off all contact. She continued therapy and slowly rebuilt her relationship with Emma. James and Catherine's marriage survived, though it was different now. There was wariness, A recognition that Catherine's failure to protect Emma had caused fundamental damage. They went to couples counseling, worked through the betrayal and pain, and eventually found a path forward. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Emma thrived. The nightmares faded. She started preschool and made friends. Dr. Kim said she was resilient, that children could recover from trauma if they had support and love. James made sure she had both in abundance. One evening, 6 months after Eleanor's sentencing, James sat at his home office reviewing case files for his business. The PI firm had grown. His handling of Eleanor's case had brought new clients, people who needed someone who would fight for them without compromise. His phone rang. Patricia Morrison. James, I wanted you to know something. I visited Eleanor in prison today. Why? Because I needed to see if there was any remorse, any recognition of what she'd done. Patricia's voice was sad. There wasn't. She spent the entire visit blaming everyone else. You, Catherine, the jury, the judge. She still believes she did nothing wrong. Some people never change. No, they don't. But I also wanted to thank you for fighting for Emma when no one else would, for doing what Robert couldn't, stopping Eleanor before she hurt more people. I just protected my daughter. You did more than that. You ended a cycle of abuse that's gone on for generations. That matters. After hanging up, James walked upstairs to Emma's room. His daughter was asleep, her stuffed rabbit clutched close, her face peaceful. He watched her breathe, this tiny person who'd changed everything, who'd given him purpose beyond himself. Eleanor Walsh had hurt Emma. She tried to break his family. She'd thought her power and manipulation would let her escape consequences. She'd been wrong. James had dismantled her completely, legally, financially, socially. He'd exposed her crimes, destroyed her protectors, and ensured she'd spend the rest of her life behind bars. He'd done it methodically, strategically, using every skill he'd learned in 8 years of military service and 5 years as an investigator. He'd won. But more importantly, Emma was safe. And that was all that had ever mattered. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Hello, and welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're grateful for each view and comment. Tell us, from which country or city are you watching today? We enjoy connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations of Sand. Damon Sullivan had built everything in his life through meticulous calculation. The sprawling Lakewood estate, the thriving investment firm, even his marriage to Natalie. Each decision made with precision. Their wedding 15 years ago had been the society event of Boston, uniting old money with new ambition. At 42, Damon had the sharp features and confident bearing of a man who commanded respect in boardrooms and social circles alike. His marriage to Natalie had once seemed perfect. She was beautiful, intelligent, and came from a prestigious family. Her mother, Evelyn Pierce, had never approved of Damon despite his success. New money, she'd mutter when she thought he couldn't hear. Not bread for our world. Damon ignored the slights. Success was his revenge against those who thought themselves better by birth alone. His own childhood in a working-class neighborhood of Pittsburgh had taught him that resources were finite, loyalty rare, and betrayal commonplace. You're working late again? Natalie's voice carried a hint of accusation as she leaned against his home office doorway. At 38, she remained striking, auburn hair falling in perfect waves, emerald eyes calculating beneath perfectly sculpted brows. The Hamilton merger won't close itself, Damon replied, without looking up from his laptop. I thought you had that charity gala tonight. Canceled. But that's convenient for you, isn't it? A sarcastic smile played on her lips. Damon finally looked up. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. She waved dismissively. I'll be at my mother's for dinner. Don't wait up. After she left, Damon stared at the wall, contemplating the growing distance between them. His phone buzzed. A text from his younger brother, Trevor. We need to talk. It's about Natalie. Call me. Damon frowned. Trevor had always been protective, seeing danger where Damon saw opportunity. Still, Trevor's instincts were rarely wrong. He dialed his brother's number. "I debated whether to tell you this," Trevor said without preamble. "Natalie's been meeting with Victor Hargrove regularly." Victor Hargrove, Natalie's colleague at the architectural firm where she was a partner. Harvard-educated, from an established family. Exactly the type of man Evelyn Pierce would approve of for her daughter. "They work together," Damon replied evenly. "They have projects." "Not at the Harborview Hotel, they don't," Trevor countered. "I saw them last week. They looked intimate." Something cold settled in Damon's stomach. "I appreciate the concern, but I need evidence before I make accusations. Natalie values her professional relationships." "Your call. Just watch your back." After hanging up, Damon sat motionless. He'd built his fortune by seeing patterns others missed. Now he reviewed the past 6 months. Natalie's late nights, new clothes, sudden interest in privacy, decreasing intimacy. The pattern was forming, but Damon wasn't one to act on suspicion alone. He needed facts. He opened his laptop and created a new folder labeled Contingency. If what he suspected was true, Damon wouldn't just defend himself. He would ensure that those who betrayed him would regret it for the rest of their lives. The next morning, Damon called in a favor from an old client who specialized in digital security. By afternoon, monitoring software had been discreetly installed on their home network. That evening, he suggested a weekend trip to their lake house. "I can't this weekend," Natalie said quickly. "The Westfield project proposal is due Monday." "With Victor?" Damon asked casually. A flicker of something, alarm, crossed her face before she composed herself. "Among others." "What?" "Just curious about your work. You rarely talk about it anymore." She smiled tightly. "Because you rarely seem interested." That night, lying beside his sleeping wife, Damon made his decision. He would discover the truth, and if his suspicions proved correct, his response would be devastating. Damon Sullivan didn't lose, especially not to those who thought themselves entitled to take what was his. Chapter 2: Shadows and Whispers. The first concrete evidence arrived 3 weeks later. Damon had been simultaneously building his case and observing Natalie's behavior with detached precision. The monitoring software had captured text messages between her and Victor. "V, miss you already. Last night was incredible. And patience. Our time is coming." These suspects nothing. Damon stared at the exchange, feeling strangely calm. The betrayal stung less than the calculation behind it. This wasn't just passion, this was planning. Further investigation revealed more troubling patterns. Natalie had been accessing their joint financial accounts, documenting balances, investment portfolios. She'd recently spoken with their attorney without mentioning it to Damon. It was during a business lunch with Preston Mills, a banking executive and longtime acquaintance, that Damon received unexpected insight. "Your wife made quite an impression on the board," Preston mentioned casually over their entrees. Damon maintained his composed expression. "Board?" "The Sullivan Family Foundation." She presented architectural plans for the new community center. "With Victor Hargrove." Preston paused. "I assumed you knew." The Sullivan Family Foundation was Damon's philanthropic project, his attempt to provide opportunities for underprivileged children like he once was. Natalie had never shown interest in it before. "Of course," Damon smiled smoothly. "Just curious about your impression." "They were very synchronized," Preston replied carefully. "Victor mentioned they've been working closely on several projects. His family has substantial connections in development." Later that day, Damon contacted his personal attorney, Samuel Westbrook, a ruthless legal mind he kept separate from the firm that handled his and Natalie's joint matters. "I need options," Damon explained after outlining his suspicions. Discreetly. "Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state," Samuel reminded him. "Without a bulletproof prenup, which you don't have, she could get up to half." "I'm not concerned about money," Damon replied. "I want to understand what they're planning." Samuel leaned forward. "You need surveillance. Professional, legal surveillance." Damon hired 2 firms, one to monitor Natalie and Victor, another to investigate their electronic communications. He was building a case with the methodical precision that had made him successful in business. Meanwhile, he maintained a perfect facade at home. He brought Natalie flowers, suggested dinners, acted the devoted husband. If she noticed the change, she didn't comment, perhaps attributing it to guilt for his prior neglect. During a dinner party at their home, Damon watched Victor interact with Natalie. The architect was tall, aristocratic, with the easy confidence of generational wealth. Damon observed the subtle glances, the careful distance they maintained, the practiced indifference. "Your husband's quite accomplished," Victor said to Natalie when Damon approached them, champagne in hand. "The Sullivan investment strategy is legendary." "Damon has always been good with money," Natalie replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Though some values can't be measured in dollars." Like architectural beauty, Victor added smoothly, or meaningful connections. The conversation dripped with subtext that Damon pretended not to notice. "Victor's firm is doing remarkable work with sustainable design," he commented pleasantly. "Perhaps we should consider them for the new office building." Victor's expression flickered with surprise before he recovered. "I'd be honored to discuss it." Later that evening, after guests departed, Natalie approached Damon in his study. That was unexpected, offering Victor the building project. Damon smiled. "He's talented, and you speak highly of him." She studied him carefully. "You've been different lately, more attentive. Perhaps I'm realizing what's important." He reached for her hand, felt her momentary hesitation before she let him take it. That night, the surveillance team sent their first comprehensive report. Victor and Natalie had met 3 times that week at a private residence registered to a shell company. Financial traces showed the company linked back to Victor's family holdings. More disturbing was the discovery that Natalie had opened a separate account at Cayman National Bank, with transfers from their joint investment account disguised as charitable donations to organizations that didn't exist. As Damon reviewed the evidence, his phone buzzed with a text from Victor. "Looking forward to discussing the building project. Natalie mentioned your anniversary dinner is next week. Perhaps we could meet after?" Damon smiled coldly at the screen. Their anniversary dinner. The perfect setting for what he now planned. He texted back, perfect timing. In the darkness of his study, Damon continued assembling the pieces of his counterattack. The anniversary dinner wouldn't just mark 15 years of marriage. It would be the beginning of his calculated retribution. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. 15 years, Evelyn Pierce declared, raising her glass at the private dining room of Le Bernardin, one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants. "Though I must say, it feels longer." The bar was thinly veiled as humor. Damon smiled politely at his mother-in-law, a woman whose disapproval had been as consistent as her designer wardrobe. Evelyn, at 65, retained a regal bearing and cutting tongue that had made her a formidable presence in Boston society. "Mother," Natalie admonished without conviction, her hand resting possessively on the gift box beside her plate, a framed photograph still wrapped in silver paper. The anniversary dinner had been Damon's suggestion, including inviting Evelyn. The restaurant's private room ensured both intimacy and discretion for what would unfold. Samuel Westbrook had arranged for his associate, Patricia Donovan, to be coincidentally dining at the restaurant, ready to enter when signaled. 15 years is significant, Damon agreed, raising his glass. A time for reflection on the past and clarity about the future. Natalie's smile faltered slightly before she recovered. "To clarity," she echoed, a hint of challenge in her eyes. The appetizers arrived. Seared scallops for Natalie, foie gras for Evelyn, steak tartare for Damon. The conversation remained superficial, discussing mutual acquaintances and recent social events. Beneath the pleasantries, Damon noted Natalie checking her phone repeatedly. "Expecting a call?" he asked innocently. "Just monitoring a work situation," she replied smoothly. "The Westfield project has some complications." "With Victor?" Damon inquired, his tone casual. A flash of alarm crossed Natalie's face. "Among others. The whole team is involved." "How dedicated you are," Evelyn commented, her tone approving. "Victor Hargrove comes from excellent stock. His grandfather established half the important buildings in Boston." Speaking of Victor, Damon interjected, he sent his regards. We're discussing the possibility of his firm designing our new corporate headquarters. Natalie's fork paused midway to her mouth. You didn't mention that was moving forward. Some opportunities are too valuable to ignore. Damon smiled pleasantly. But enough about work. I believe it's time for gifts. Natalie visibly relaxed, reaching for the silver-wrapped package beside her. I had this specially made, she announced, pushing it toward Damon. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a silver frame containing a professional photograph of Natalie and Victor standing before an architectural model. Both were smiling confidently at the camera. This is from the Westfield presentation, Natalie explained. I thought you'd appreciate seeing the professional side of my life. Victor has been instrumental in advancing my career. She smirked slightly. He understands my ambitions. Some men just can't keep up with modern professional women, Evelyn added, her gaze fixed pointedly on Damon. They're threatened by female success. Damon examined the photograph thoughtfully. The body language between Natalie and Victor told its own story. Standing closer than colleagues would, his hand positioned possessively at the small of her back. It's revealing, Damon finally said, placing the frame carefully on the table. Thank you for this insight into your priorities. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Happy anniversary, Natalie. Open it. Natalie's expression softened with anticipation as she accepted the box. Jewelry had always been his standard gift, expensive, impersonal tokens that marked the passage of time. She opened it slowly, then froze. Inside was not jewelry, but a small USB drive. What is this? She asked, confusion replacing her expectant smile. A modern gift for a modern woman, Damon replied evenly. It contains printed screenshots of your texts with Victor detailing your affair, your plans to drain my accounts before filing for divorce. The color drained from Natalie's face. Evelyn's gasp was audible in the suddenly silent room. I don't know what you're talking about, Natalie attempted, her voice unsteady. Don't you? Damon removed a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. The Cayman account, the falsified charitable donations, the consultations with divorce attorneys, the property in Vermont purchased through Victor's shell company, intended, I believe, as your post-divorce residence. You've been spying on me? Natalie hissed, anger replacing shock. I've been protecting my interests, Damon corrected calmly, just as you've been advancing yours. At that moment, Patricia Donovan appeared at the entrance to the private dining room. Mr. Sullivan? Is this a good time? Perfect timing, Patricia, Damon replied, gesturing her inside. My wife and mother-in-law were just learning about some legal developments. This is absurd, Evelyn declared, reaching for her purse. Natalie, we're leaving. I wouldn't, Damon advised. Not if you want to avoid public embarrassment. The management is aware of the situation and has been instructed to prevent disruptions. Patricia placed a thick document on the table. The divorce petition, as you requested, Mr. Sullivan, along with the evidence packets for the civil suit against Mr. Hargrove for alienation of affection and the criminal complaints regarding the financial improprieties. Natalie stared at the documents, her composure crumbling. You can't prove anything. Can I? Damon activated his phone, and Victor's voice filled the room from a recorded conversation. Once the accounts are emptied and transferred, he'll have no liquidity to fight you in court. The prenup becomes unenforceable if we can prove emotional abandonment. Your mother's testimony will help establish that pattern. Evelyn's face had gone ashen. Natalie looked trapped, her calculated plan disintegrating before her eyes. You've been played, Natalie, Damon said quietly. While you thought I was oblivious, I was 10 steps ahead. That's the difference between us. You scheme, I strategize. The main course arrived, the server oblivious to the tension as he placed perfectly prepared dishes before them. Damon thanked him politely, then turned back to his wife. Now we have choices, he continued. You can sign my divorce agreement, which allows you to leave with your personal possessions and a modest settlement, or you can fight me and lose everything, including your freedom, given the nature of the financial fraud you've committed. You would send me to prison? Natalie whispered. Without hesitation, Damon confirmed, his voice devoid of emotion. The evidence has already been prepared for the district attorney. Patricia is merely waiting for my signal. Tears formed in Natalie's eyes. Whether from fear or rage was unclear. I loved you once, she said bitterly. Perhaps, Damon acknowledged. But love without loyalty is worthless to me. The storm had broken, but this was merely the beginning of Damon's calculated retribution. Victor Hargrove would soon discover that seducing Damon Sullivan's wife was the most catastrophic mistake of his privileged life. Chapter 4: Battlegrounds. Victor Hargrove had always believed his family name was armor enough against life's complications. The morning after Damon's anniversary revelation, that illusion shattered when he arrived at his firm's offices to find the entrance blocked by security guards. Mr. Hargrove, the lead guard approached. I'm afraid you've been temporarily barred from the premises pending an emergency board meeting. What? Victor's aristocratic features contorted with indignation. This is my family's firm. You can't keep me out. The board's orders, sir. Your access has been suspended. Victor's phone buzzed. A text from his father, Montgomery Hargrove. Emergency meeting called. Serious allegations. Come to the house immediately. The Hargrove estate in Beacon Hill had been the family for 5 generations. Montgomery, at 70, remained a powerful figure in Boston's business and social circles. When Victor arrived, he found his father in the study with 2 men he recognized as board members of Hargrove Architectural. What's happening? Victor demanded. Montgomery's expression was granite. Damon Sullivan has presented the board with evidence that you've been misappropriating client funds and diverting them to personal accounts. He's also filed a civil suit against you personally for alienation of affection. Victor paled. That's absurd. He can't prove. He has recordings. Victor, Montgomery interrupted sharply. Of you and Natalie discussing not only your affair, but detailed plans to divert funds from Sullivan's foundation projects. The board is calling for your resignation, added Harrison Pembroke, the senior board member, in return of all misappropriated funds. This is a setup, Victor insisted. Sullivan is manipulating you because of Natalie. Is Natalie manipulating the banking records too? Montgomery slid several documents across the desk. These transfers came from your authorization codes. Victor stared at the papers in disbelief. The transactions were indeed authorized with his credentials, moving funds from client accounts through a series of shells that eventually connected to the Vermont property and the Cayman account he'd helped Natalie establish. I didn't do this, he insisted, though doubt crept into his voice. Then explain it, Montgomery demanded. Because Sullivan's evidence is compelling enough that the board is considering cooperating with authorities to minimize the firm's liability. Victor's phone buzzed again, Natalie calling. He declined it, suddenly uncertain of everything. Sullivan's orchestrating this, Victor said finally. He's framing me because of Natalie. And what about Natalie? Montgomery asked coldly. Is he orchestrating your affair with a married woman as well? Victor had no answer. Across town, Damon sat in his office, monitoring the cascading consequences of his counteroperation. The first phase, separating Natalie and Victor from their support systems, was proceeding efficiently. Trevor entered with coffee. Natalie's been calling nonstop. Her access to the house has been revoked, her credit cards canceled, and her personal accounts frozen pending investigation. And Victor, Damon inquired, currently being excommunicated by his father and the Hargrove board. The financial evidence you planted is quite convincing. Damon nodded. How is the Sullivan Foundation board responding? They've called an emergency session for tomorrow. The evidence suggests Victor and Natalie were planning to divert funds from the community center project to their personal accounts. Excellent. Damon sipped his coffee. And the media? Trevor grimaced. That's where it gets messy. Financial Times is already sniffing around rumors of improprieties at Hargrove Architectural. Boston Globe Society reporter called asking about your separation. Feed the financial story, Damon instructed. Decline comment on personal matters. We want to focus on Victor's professional misconduct, not our marital issues. You don't think people will connect the dots? Of course they will. But officially, we maintain that the financial discoveries prompted the marital investigation, not vice versa. Trevor studied his brother. You've orchestrated this like a military campaign. When you hunt predators, you must think like one, Damon replied. Victor and Natalie believe themselves entitled to take what's mine. I'm simply ensuring they understand the cost of that miscalculation. The board meeting tomorrow will result in their removal from all Foundation activities and a formal request for criminal investigation, Damon finished. The evidence suggests they plan to divert nearly $2 million intended for underprivileged children. Evidence you manufactured, Trevor noted without judgment. Evidence that tells a compelling story, Damon corrected. One consistent with their actual intentions toward me personally. His phone signaled an incoming call from an unknown number. Damon answered on speaker. Mr. Sullivan. Victor's voice was tightly controlled. We need to talk. Mr. Hargrove. Challenging day. You know exactly what you're doing, Victor hissed. This vendetta. This consequence, Damon interrupted smoothly. There's a distinction. My family name is precisely why you believed yourself untouchable, Damon finished. A miscalculation on your part. Silence stretched between them before Victor spoke again. What do you want? Want? Nothing. This isn't a negotiation, Victor. It's an education. By week's end, your reputation will be in tatters, your professional credentials under investigation, and your family's firm facing potential criminal liability. Your father will sacrifice you to save the Hargrove name. You're destroying lives over an affair, Victor said incredulously. No, Damon's voice hardened. I'm responding proportionally to a calculated attempt to destroy mine. You and Natalie plotted to take everything from me, my assets, my foundation, my reputation. Did you truly believe I would discover your betrayal and simply walk away wounded? This won't bring her back, Victor attempted. Damon laughed coldly. I don't want her back. I want justice, my version of it. Sleep well, Victor. He disconnected the call and turned to Trevor. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. Ensure the evidence reaches the district attorney's office by noon. Trevor nodded solemnly. What about Evelyn? She's been making calls to her society friends, spinning the situation. Let her. Evelyn's influence depends on her daughter's marriage to me. As that crumbles, so will her standing. Damon checked his watch. The Foundation board meets at 10. I want our security team escorting Natalie from the premises by 10:30. And if she doesn't show, she'll show, Damon said confidently. Natalie still believes she can salvage something from this situation. That misconception ends tomorrow. As night fell over Boston, 3 people lay awake in separate locations, each contemplating how thoroughly their lives had changed in 24 hours. For 2 of them, it was only beginning. Chapter 5. Calculated Moves. The Sullivan Foundation boardroom fell silent as Damon finished presenting the evidence against Natalie and Victor. 10 board members, Boston's elite business and philanthropic leaders, sat in stunned disbelief. These transfers, Dorothy Whitmore, the Foundation's treasurer, pointed to the projected financial records. They were authorized using Ms. Sullivan's credentials? And Mr. Hargrove's, Damon confirmed. The audit trail shows they were accessing the system during off hours, gradually establishing the framework for larger diversions timed to coincide with the community center groundbreaking next month. Have you contacted authorities? Asked Benjamin Russo, a prominent banker. Not yet, Damon replied. I wanted the board's direction before proceeding. The double doors opened, and Natalie walked in, composed but pale. All heads turned. I apologize for my tardiness, she said smoothly, moving toward her usual seat. Traffic was. You weren't invited to this meeting, Natalie, Damon interrupted. The board is discussing your removal. Natalie froze, then straightened her shoulders. On what grounds? Dorothy Whitmore swiveled her laptop toward Natalie. These financial records suggest you and Victor Hargrove were preparing to divert Foundation funds. We're considering whether to involve law enforcement. That's preposterous, Natalie scoffed, though her voice wavered. Damon is manipulating you because of our marital issues. These transactions occurred from your authorized devices, Benjamin pointed out. Unless you're suggesting someone stole your credentials? Natalie's gaze darted around the room, finding no allies. I demand time to review these allegations with my attorney. Of course, Damon agreed reasonably. The board will reconvene after you've had that opportunity. In the meantime, your foundation access is suspended and security will escort you from the building. On cue, 2 security officers appeared at the doorway. The humiliation was calculated. Natalie forced to walk past her social peers under escort, her reputation in tatters. As she reached the door, Natalie turned back. "This isn't over, Damon." On that, he replied evenly, "We agree." After the board meeting adjourned with a unanimous vote to suspend Natalie and refer the matter to authorities, Damon returned to his office, where Samuel Westbrook awaited him. "The district attorney has the preliminary evidence package," Samuel reported. "They're reviewing it for potential charges." And the Hargrove situation? Imploding beautifully. The firm has announced Victor's leave of absence, pending an internal investigation. 3 major clients have already suspended projects. Damon nodded, satisfied. "What's our vulnerability?" "Minimal. The evidence trail is compelling, but would require extensive forensic investigation to disprove. By then, the damage to their reputations will be irreversible." Samuel hesitated. "However, there is a complication. Victor's father is calling in favors from Judge Holloway. Judge Martin Holloway had presided over business cases in Massachusetts for decades, with a reputation for protecting established interests." "Expected," Damon acknowledged. "That's why we've established multiple fronts. If the criminal charges encounter political resistance, the civil litigation and professional ethics complaints continue." His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Sullivan, Evelyn Pierce is demanding to see you." Damon smiled thinly. "Send her in." Evelyn swept into the office like a fury, designer handbag clutched like a weapon. "You vindictive bastard. You're destroying my daughter's life." "Your daughter destroyed her own life," Damon replied calmly. "With your encouragement, if I recall your anniversary toast correctly." Samuel discreetly excused himself, closing the door behind him. Natalie made a mistake. Evelyn conceded, changing tactics. But this public humiliation serves no purpose except revenge. "It serves justice," Damon corrected. "And consequences. What will it take to end this?" Evelyn demanded. "Money? A quiet divorce." That opportunity existed yesterday. Today, the machinery is in motion. Evelyn's composure cracked. "You came from nothing. My daughter gave you social legitimacy. Without the Pierce connection, you'd still be the scholarship boy pretending to belong." Damon's expression hardened. "That scholarship boy built a fortune while your family squandered theirs. Natalie married me because your estates were mortgaged to the hilt and your investment portfolio was collapsing." "How dare you?" "I dare because it's true," Damon interrupted. "I paid off your debts as a wedding gift to Natalie. The Pierce reputation for wealth has been a facade for years, one I maintained out of respect for my wife." Evelyn paled. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your social standing depends entirely on my continued financial support that ends with Natalie's divorce." "You can't." "I already have. The trust that pays your expenses has been dissolved. The mortgage on your Beacon Hill home, which I hold, is now in default. You have 30 days to vacate." Evelyn collapsed into a chair, her aristocratic facade crumbling. "You've planned this meticulously." "I learned long ago to prepare for betrayal," Damon replied without emotion. "It's a lesson your daughter and her lover are now learning as well." "What do you want from me?" Evelyn whispered. "Nothing. Your collateral damage in Natalie's miscalculation." Damon checked his watch. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with the district attorney in 30 minutes. After Evelyn left, Damon stood at his office window, overlooking Boston Harbor. Phase 2 was proceeding exactly as planned, isolating Natalie and Victor, undermining their professional standing, initiating legal consequences. Next came the systematic dismantling of their futures. His phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. Victor attempted to access his offshore accounts. Found them frozen. Damon smiled coldly. The net was tightening. Across town, Victor sat in his attorney's office, facing increasingly dire news. "The board has voted to suspend you indefinitely," his lawyer explained. "Your father abstained, but the vote was otherwise unanimous." They can't just erase me from my own family's firm, Victor protested. They can when the bylaws specifically allow for removal of any partner under criminal investigation. The lawyer slid a document across the desk. The DA's office has opened a formal inquiry into the foundation transfers. Sullivan is framing me. Perhaps, but he's doing it expertly. The lawyer looked troubled. The evidence trail is comprehensive. Your devices authorize the transfers. Your digital fingerprints are everywhere. Can you fight it? We could try, but I'm more concerned about the civil suit. Sullivan is claiming damages of $50 million for alienation of affection and business interference. Victor blanched. That's absurd. Perhaps, but it will take years to fight, during which your assets will be encumbered by legal holds. The lawyer hesitated. There's more. The Architectural Licensing Board has been notified of potential ethical violations. He's trying to destroy me completely, Victor realized. Effectively, yes. The lawyer studied him. What exactly did you do to this man? Victor had no answer that wouldn't further incriminate him. His phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. We need to meet. Now, the pieces were falling exactly as Damon had calculated. The game was entering its next phase, and his opponents were only beginning to understand the true depths of his strategy. Chapter 6: Sacrificial Pieces. The private room at the back of Carbone's restaurant offered both discretion and security, important considerations as Natalie and Victor met for the first time since their world began collapsing. This is a setup, Victor said immediately, his normally immaculate appearance showing signs of strain, unshaven, shirt wrinkled, eyes haunted. Sullivan has manufactured evidence against us. Not manufactured, Natalie corrected, her voice hollow. Orchestrated. There's a difference. What are you saying? I've reviewed the financial evidence with my attorney. Those transactions occurred from our devices. Victor, Damon didn't forge documents. He created situations where we actually performed the actions that now incriminate us. That's impossible, Victor insisted. I never authorized transfers from client accounts. Did you ever use my laptop? Enter passwords I gave you. Victor paled, remembering several occasions when Natalie had asked him to log into her foundation account to review architectural plans while she was on calls. He manipulated us, Natalie continued. Every suspicious transfer occurred when we were together, using our credentials, creating a perfect paper trail. Why didn't you see this coming? Victor demanded. You're his wife, and you're supposed to be brilliant, she snapped back. Neither of us recognized what he was capable of. Their conversation was interrupted as Theodore Blackwood, Victor's oldest friend and a partner at Boston's most prestigious law firm, joined them. It's worse than we thought, Theodore announced without preamble. Sullivan didn't just build a case against you both. He systematically neutralized your potential defenses. Judge Holloway has recused himself from all related cases due to a suddenly discovered conflict of interest. What conflict? Victor asked. Sullivan apparently provided significant financing for Holloway's son's business 2 years ago. The timing suggests he was establishing leverage even before he suspected your affair. That's insane, Natalie whispered. It would mean he's been planning this for years. Not planning, Theodore corrected. Preparing. There's a distinction. Sullivan has contingencies for everything. The DA investigating your case? His daughter received a full scholarship to Stanford from a foundation where Sullivan is the primary donor. Your family's banking relationships? Sullivan's firm acquired a controlling interest in Cambridge Trust 6 months ago. He can't have anticipated everything, Victor insisted. Theodore's expression remained grim. He didn't need to. He just needed to control enough variables to limit your options once he made his move. Natalie stared at her half-empty wine glass. What options do we have left? Limited ones, Theodore admitted. Legally, you're both exposed. The evidence trail is comprehensive. Fighting it means years of litigation with uncertain outcomes. My family has influence, Victor began. Your family is distancing themselves, Theodore interrupted. Your father has called a family council to discuss removing you from the Hargrove Trust. Victor looked physically ill. They can't do that. The trust includes a moral turpitude clause. They can and likely will. Natalie's phone buzzed with a text. Her face went ashen as she read it. What now? Victor asked. My mother's house is being foreclosed on. Natalie's voice quivered. Apparently Damon holds the mortgage through a subsidiary. He's called in the loan. Theodore spread his hands. This is his strategy, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously, creating too many fires for you to extinguish. There must be a way to negotiate, Natalie insisted. Everyone has a price. Sullivan doesn't want money, Theodore pointed out. He wants consequences. The restaurant's owner appeared at their table, looking uncomfortable. Miss Sullivan, there are reporters outside asking about you and Mr. Hargrove. Someone tipped them off that you're here. Damon, Natalie whispered. I'll handle it, Theodore assured them, stepping outside. Left alone, Victor and Natalie faced the ruins of their plans. What had begun as attraction had evolved into ambition. Natalie seeking escape from a marriage that had become a business arrangement. Victor seeing opportunity in aligning with the Pierce family name while appropriating Sullivan's connections. We underestimated him, Victor finally admitted. No, Natalie countered, a chill in her voice. Underestimated him. You never knew what he was capable of. Theodore returned, his expression even more troubled. The Boston Globe is running a story tomorrow on financial improprieties at the Sullivan Foundation, naming you both as subjects of investigation. 3 other outlets have confirmed similar stories. How is this happening so fast? Victor demanded. Because Sullivan already had the evidence packaged and ready, Theodore explained. He was just waiting for the right moment to release it. Can you stop it? Natalie asked desperately. Not all of it. Not in time. Theodore hesitated. There's one other option, but you won't like it. What? Separation. If you both publicly disavow each other, claim the affair was a mistake and the financial issues a misunderstanding, there's a chance to mitigate some damage. You want us to turn on each other? Victor asked incredulously. I want you to recognize the reality, Theodore replied bluntly. Together, you're an easy target. Separately, each of you might salvage something. Natalie studied Victor thoughtfully. Theodore's right. United we fall. Divided we might survive. You can't be serious, Victor protested. Deadly serious, Natalie's voice hardened. Damon is systematically destroying everything we care about. Our only chance is to change the narrative. By abandoning each other, Victor concluded bitterly. By adapting, Natalie corrected. Isn't that what survivors do? As their debate continued, Damon sat in his office reviewing Theodore Blackwood's text updates. Theodore had been in Damon's employ for months, assigned to represent Victor's interests while actually reporting every detail to Damon. Meeting proceeding as expected. They're considering separation strategy. Damon smiled coldly. Even their attempts at counter-strategy were following his anticipated pathways. The carefully orchestrated media leaks, the foreclosure notice, the trust challenge, each applying pressure from different directions, forcing his targets into predictable responses. The reporters have surrounded Carbone's, Trevor reported, entering the office. Natalie and Victor are effectively trapped inside, unless they want to face cameras. Excellent. And the DA? Moving forward with the investigation. The evidence is too compelling to ignore, even with political pressure. Damon nodded, satisfied. What about Plan B? In motion. If the criminal charges falter, the SEC investigation is ready. Victor's firm has multiple regulatory vulnerabilities we can exploit. Good. Damon stared thoughtfully at the chessboard on his desk, where a complex endgame was developing. They'll try to separate their fates now. Natalie will attempt to portray herself as a victim of Victor's manipulation. Will that work? Trevor asked. It doesn't matter. The pieces are already in motion. Damon moved a bishop, capturing a knight. Checkmate in 3 moves. As knight fell over Boston, the consequences continued to cascade. Victor emerged from Carbone's to face a gauntlet of reporters shouting questions about financial fraud and professional misconduct. Natalie slipped out the back, only to find Evelyn waiting in a taxi, tears streaming down her aristocratic face. We're ruined, Evelyn whispered as Natalie entered the cab. Everything is gone. Not everything, Natalie replied, a hardness entering her voice. Not yet. She made a decision then, one born of desperation and survival instinct. If Damon wanted war, she would give him one, even if it meant sacrificing Victor and everything they planned together. The game had evolved, but Damon had anticipated this move as well. The battle was entering its final phase, with pieces being sacrificed across the board as the endgame approached. Chapter 7: Desperate Measures. The Hampshire house overlooked Boston Common, its elegant walls having witnessed generations of the city's power dynamics. In a private suite, Natalie sat across from Bradford Kensington, managing partner of Kensington, Marsh & Porter, the most aggressive divorce firm in Massachusetts. Damon has outmaneuvered us at every turn, Natalie admitted, her composure cracking. He's frozen my assets, destroyed my reputation, and is pushing for criminal charges. Kensington studied her file critically. Your position is precarious. The financial evidence is damning. Even if you avoid criminal prosecution, the civil liability could follow you for decades. I need options, Natalie insisted. There must be something we can use against him. Mr. Sullivan appears to have insulated himself remarkably well, Kensington observed. He's maintained a pristine paper trail while documenting your indiscretions meticulously. Everyone has secrets, Natalie countered. Damon built his fortune rapidly. There must be irregularities. Perhaps, but finding them would require resources you no longer have. Natalie's eyes hardened. What if I could provide information about Sullivan Investment Group's trading patterns? Data suggesting potential insider activities. Kensington's interest visibly sharpened. That would change the equation. But do you have such evidence? Not yet, Natalie admitted. But I know where to look. After leaving Kensington's office, Natalie made 2 calls. The first to her former assistant at the architectural firm, who still had access to the Sullivan Foundation servers. The second to an old college friend now working at the SEC. Meanwhile, Victor faced his own desperate scenario. The Hargrove Family Council had voted to suspend his access to trust distributions pending resolution of the allegations. His personal accounts were encumbered by legal holds. His professional reputation was in tatters. The licensing board has scheduled a hearing, his attorney informed him. They're considering emergency suspension of your architectural credentials. Based on what? Victor demanded. No charges have been filed. Based on the evidence presented by the Sullivan Foundation. The standards for professional ethics proceedings are lower than criminal court. Victor paced his rented apartment, a far cry from his Beacon Hill townhouse, which had been secured by Sullivan's attorneys as potential compensation for civil damages. What if I cooperate with authorities? Victor asked suddenly. Provide information about Natalie's role in exchange for leniency? The attorney looked troubled. You be confirming wrongdoing. Lesser wrongdoing, Victor clarified. I could position myself as manipulated by Natalie. She had access to the foundation's finances. She initiated our relationship. Throwing Ms. Sullivan under the bus might help, but it doesn't explain your participation. What if I had evidence of other improprieties? Things involving Sullivan himself. Do you have such evidence? Victor hesitated. Not yet, but Natalie mentioned concerns about Sullivan Investment Group's trading practices. If we could show Damon has his own secrets. Across town, Damon reviewed security alerts indicating unauthorized access attempts on the Sullivan Investment Group's secure servers. Natalie's digital fingerprints? He asked Roland Chun, his head of cybersecurity. Not directly, Roland replied. The attempts came through Foundation systems using her old assistant's credentials. We tracked it to a coffee shop near Hampshire House. Damon smiled coldly. Desperation makes people predictable. Any real vulnerability? None. The honeypot servers activated as designed. They accessed only what we wanted them to see. Trevor entered with a report from their private investigator. Natalie met with Bradford Kensington this morning. Victor has approached the DA about a potential cooperation agreement. Right on schedule, Damon noted, checking his watch. They're looking for leverage, believing their only hope is finding something they can use against me. Will they find anything? Trevor asked. Only what I want them to find. Damon indicated the monitor showing access logs. They're currently downloading trading records that appear to show pattern irregularities. Records I created specifically for this scenario. You anticipated they'd look for insider trading evidence. I anticipated they'd seek any vulnerability to exploit. Financial impropriety is the obvious choice. Damon turned to Roland. How long until they discover the fabricated Jenkins merger documents? Based on their search patterns, within the hour. Damon nodded, satisfied. And the real SEC investigation? Proceeding as arranged, Trevor confirmed. The evidence you provided about Hargrove Architectural's foreign financial arrangements has their full attention. The carefully constructed web continued to tighten. While Natalie and Victor desperately sought leverage, Damon had already positioned their very attempts as additional evidence against them. Their unauthorized server access was being logged and documented, creating yet another layer of legal jeopardy. That evening, Victor received an encrypted message from Natalie. Found something. Trading irregularities in Sullivan Investment Group. Possible Jenkins merger insider information. Meeting my SEC contact tomorrow. Victor's hopes rose for the first time in weeks. He replied immediately. Need to meet tonight. My place. 8 p.m. What Victor didn't know was that his encrypted messaging app had been compromised weeks earlier. Damon read their exchange in real time, each desperate move confirming his psychological profile of his opponents. They've found the bait, he informed Samuel Westbrook. Schedule the SEC interview for tomorrow afternoon. I want agents waiting when Natalie arrives with her evidence. Entrapment, Samuel questioned. Justice, Damon corrected. They're attempting to fabricate evidence against me using illegally accessed confidential documents. The SEC will be very interested in that fact. As night fell, Natalie arrived at Victor's apartment, clutching a flash drive containing what she believed was damning evidence against Damon. These trading patterns showed Sullivan Investment Group positioned heavily before the Jenkins announcement, she explained, showing Victor the documents. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence. Will it be enough? Victor asked. Combined with testimony about Damon's controlling behavior and emotional manipulation, it creates reasonable doubt about the foundation allegations. Natalie's eyes gleamed with renewed hope. We can argue he fabricated evidence against us as revenge. My attorney thinks I should distance myself from you, Victor admitted. Natalie's expression hardened. That would be a mistake. United, we have a chance. Divided, he'll destroy us individually. Neither realized that their conversation was being recorded, their desperate strategizing becoming additional evidence of conspiracy. The trap Damon had set months earlier was closing, with his targets maneuvering precisely as he had anticipated. The next morning, Damon met with the district attorney, providing final documentation of the foundation financial improprieties. The case is solid, the DA confirmed. Grand jury indictments should come through by week's end. And the SEC matter? Damon inquired. Coordinated as requested. If they present the fabricated trading records, they'll face additional federal charges for market manipulation attempts. Damon nodded, satisfied. They'll be meeting their supposed SEC contact at 2 o'clock. Agents will be waiting, the DA confirmed. This is quite the web you've woven, Damon. Justice requires thoroughness, Damon replied without emotion. They plan to destroy everything I've built. I'm simply ensuring appropriate consequences. As Damon left the DA's office, he received confirmation that the final piece had fallen into place. The Sullivan Foundation Board had voted unanimously to pursue maximum criminal and civil remedies against Natalie and Victor. The endgame was approaching. All pieces were positioned exactly as Damon had calculated months earlier when he first discovered Natalie's betrayal. What had begun as a marriage was ending as a masterclass in strategic retribution. Chapter 8, The Sacrifice. The federal building's interview room felt unnaturally cold as Natalie and Victor sat across from two stone-faced SEC investigators. What they had expected to be a confidential meeting to present evidence against Damon had instantly transformed into their own interrogation. These documents you've provided, Agent Larson began, holding up the flash drive. Where did you obtain them? From Sullivan Investment Group servers, Natalie replied cautiously. I had legitimate access as Damon's wife. Our information indicates otherwise, Agent Pearson countered. Server logs show unauthorized access using compromised credentials. That's a federal offense under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Victor and Natalie exchanged alarm glances. Furthermore, Larson continued, preliminary analysis indicates these trading records have been altered. Attempting to fabricate evidence of securities fraud is itself a serious crime. That's absurd, Victor protested. We found these records exactly as they are. In a secured server area you accessed illegally, Pearson noted, while already under investigation for financial crimes. The door opened, and Damon entered with a man Natalie recognized as the SEC's regional director. Mr. Sullivan has been cooperating with our office on several matters, the director explained, including monitoring unauthorized access attempts to his company's servers. This was a setup, Natalie realized, her voice hollow. This was consequence, Damon corrected calmly. You attempted to fabricate evidence against me to escape your own legal jeopardy. That decision has now compounded your problems significantly. Victor stood abruptly. You manipulated everything from the beginning. I protected myself, Damon replied without emotion. There's a distinction. The SEC director cleared his throat. Ms. Sullivan, Mr. Hargrove, based on the evidence before us, we're preparing charges related to attempted securities fraud, unauthorized computer access, and conspiracy. As the reality of their situation became clear, Natalie made a desperate calculation. I want to cooperate, she announced suddenly. Victor masterminded everything. The affair, the foundation theft, this evidence tampering. I was coerced. Victor stared at her in disbelief. You betray me now? I'm saving myself, Natalie replied coldly. Someone has to survive this. The perfect unity they had presented crumbled instantly under pressure, exactly as Damon had predicted. He watched dispassionately as they turned on each other, accusations flying, each attempting to minimize their own culpability by maximizing the others. After 30 minutes of this spectacle, Damon quietly excused himself. In the hallway, Samuel Westbrook awaited with an update. The grand jury has returned indictments on the foundation charges, Samuel reported. Arrest warrants are being processed. And the Hargrove firm? The board has voted to remove Victor permanently and change the company name. 3 generations of Hargrove legacy erased in a week. Damon nodded, satisfied. What about Evelyn? Foreclosure proceedings are advancing. She'll be removed from the Beacon Hill property within 10 days. The systematic dismantling of his opponents' lives was proceeding exactly as designed. While Natalie and Victor fought over the scraps of their remaining credibility, Damon had already moved to the next phase of his strategy. Later that evening, as Damon reviewed final documentation in his study, Trevor arrived with unexpected news. Natalie's agreed to testify against Victor in exchange for reduced charges, he reported. She's claiming he manipulated her from the beginning, using their relationship to access foundation finances. And Victor, offering similar cooperation against Natalie. The DA is playing them against each other. Damon smiled thinly. Their loyalty dissolved exactly when predicted. Trevor studied his brother. This vendetta, it's more thorough than I expected. It's not vendetta, Damon corrected. It's justice. They conspired to take everything from me, my company, my foundation, my reputation. Actions have consequences. The foundation will recover. Already has. The board has approved restructuring that removes any trace of Natalie's involvement. The community center project breaks ground next month as scheduled. Trevor hesitated. There's one more thing. Victor attempted suicide in federal custody. For the first time, Damon's composed expression faltered slightly. Is he dead? No. Guards intervened in time. He's under psychiatric hold. Damon was silent for a moment, then arrange appropriate medical care. Anonymous donor. You're helping him? Trevor asked, surprised. I'm ensuring he survives to face justice, Damon clarified. Death would be escape. The next morning, Damon received notification that Natalie had accepted a plea agreement. 5 years imprisonment for financial fraud, with testimony against Victor as part of the deal. In exchange, the SEC charges would be handled as part of the same case, rather than as separate federal counts. Victor, meanwhile, had been released to a psychiatric facility, his legal team now arguing diminished capacity, a strategy Damon had anticipated months earlier. The chess game was entering its final moves. All major pieces had been captured or neutralized. What remained was ensuring the endgame proceeded exactly as Damon had designed. That afternoon, he visited the construction site of the Sullivan Foundation's Community Center in South Boston, a project that would provide educational resources and opportunities for underprivileged children. As he surveyed the foundation being laid, Samuel joined him with final legal updates. Natalie's formal sentencing is scheduled for next week, Samuel reported. Victor's competency hearing is the following day. And the civil matters? Proceeding as planned. The courts have approved asset freezes on all their accounts. Evelyn's eviction is scheduled for Monday. Damon nodded, his gaze fixed on the construction. Ensure the media coverage is appropriate. I want the foundation's mission highlighted, not the scandal. Of course, the narrative is already shifting. You, as the victim who maintained focus on charitable work despite personal betrayal. As they walked the perimeter of what would become classrooms and computer labs, Damon reflected on the precision of his response. What Natalie and Victor had failed to understand was that his calculating nature wasn't just a business strategy. It was his fundamental approach to life. Was it worth it? Samuel asked suddenly. The marriage, knowing how it ended? Damon considered the question seriously. Every experience provides value if properly analyzed. I learned important lessons about trust, verification, and consequence. But the personal cost was anticipated and accepted, Damon finished. Nothing of value comes without risk. The mistake is failing to prepare for potential losses. As sunset painted the Boston skyline in amber hues, Damon returned to his office for a final review of the settlement documents. Everything was proceeding according to design. The pieces he had positioned months earlier were delivering exactly the outcome he had calculated. Justice, in Damon Sullivan's world, was not an abstract concept, but a precise mathematical equation, one he had solved with devastating accuracy. Chapter 9. Checkmate. 1 year later, Damon stood at the podium of the newly completed Sullivan Community Center, addressing Boston's elite gathered for the grand opening. The building, a stunning architectural achievement with sweeping glass walls and innovative sustainable design, represented the foundation's largest investment to date. Today marks not just the opening of a building, Damon told the assembled crowd, but the beginning of opportunity for thousands of children who might otherwise be overlooked by society. Every child deserves the chance to rise beyond their circumstances. In the audience, Trevor watched proudly as his brother spoke with genuine passion about creating pathways out of poverty. The center would provide academic support, technology access, mentorship, and scholarships, a comprehensive approach to breaking cycles of disadvantage. What went unmentioned was the dramatic fallout that had occurred since the anniversary dinner that had sparked such devastation. The story had dominated Boston's social circles for months before gradually fading from public consciousness. Natalie was serving her sentence at the Federal Women's Facility in Danbury, Connecticut. Her testimony had indeed helped secure Victor's conviction, though not with the results she had hoped. Rather than receiving leniency, the judge had been particularly harsh, citing her betrayal of philanthropic principles and breach of fiduciary duty. Victor had been declared competent to stand trial despite his attorney's efforts. Found guilty on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy, he was currently serving 7 years at a medium-security federal prison. The Hargrove family had legally changed their architectural firm's name, erasing Victor's connection to the generations-old business. His father had died 3 months after the conviction, with many suggesting the disgrace had accelerated his decline. Evelyn Pierce had been forced to leave Boston entirely, her social standing destroyed by the scandal and her financial security obliterated by Damon's systematic dismantling of the supports he had quietly provided for years. She now lived in a modest apartment in Providence, Rhode Island, largely ostracized by the social circles that had once embraced her. The foundation itself had emerged stronger after a brief period of scrutiny. Damon's transparent cooperation with authorities and immediate implementation of enhanced financial controls had restored confidence. Major donors had increased their contributions, impressed by his resilience and unwavering commitment to the mission despite personal betrayal. After the ceremony, as guests toured the new facility, Bradford Kensington, who had briefly represented Natalie before withdrawing, approached Damon. "Remarkable recovery," Kensington commented, gesturing around the impressive space. Few expected the foundation to survive the scandal so robustly. "People underestimate the power of systematic planning," Damon replied evenly. "Indeed." Kensington studied him curiously. "I've represented many high-net-worth individuals in contentious divorces, but never encountered anyone who executed such comprehensive consequences." "Justice requires precision," Damon said simply. "Justice or revenge?" Kensington challenged. "Is there a meaningful distinction when the outcome is proportional to the offense?" Before Kensington could respond, they were interrupted by Charlotte Westlake, the foundation's new executive director, a brilliant administrator with impeccable credentials whom Damon had recruited from Harvard's education department. "The mayor would like a private word," Charlotte informed Damon, who excused himself from Kensington with a cordial nod. Later that evening, Damon sat alone in his study at the Lakewood estate, reviewing the day's events while classical music played softly in the background. The house felt different now, cleansed of deception, though emptier. He had considered selling it, but ultimately decided against erasing his own history. Lessons required remembrance. Trevor entered with coffee and updates on their latest investment ventures. The Sullivan Investment Group had thrived in the past year, its reputation for ethical practice enhanced by Damon's handling of the foundation crisis. "I saw Kensington speaking with you," Trevor noted. "Still trying to understand how you orchestrated everything?" "People find it difficult to grasp comprehensive strategic thinking," Damon replied. "They look for simple motivations: greed, passion, revenge. They rarely recognize the mathematical elegance of properly executed consequence." "Have you heard from Natalie?" Her attorney contacted Samuel about potential appeal strategies. "Nothing viable." Trevor hesitated. "And you're certain about never considering reconciliation?" "People make mistakes." Damon's expression hardened. "Betrayal isn't a mistake. It's a choice, a series of calculated decisions made with full awareness of potential harm. Forgiveness might be spiritually admirable, but it's strategically unsound. Some might call that harsh. Some haven't built themselves from nothing, learning exactly how fragile trust is and how devastating its breach can be." Damon sipped his coffee. "I don't expect universal understanding of my principles. I expect respect for their consistency." As Trevor left, Damon moved to the window overlooking the lake that gave the estate its name. The water was calm tonight, reflecting moonlight in perfect symmetry. He found the parallel appropriate, his external composure mirroring the absolute stillness of his resolved conviction. The anniversary dinner confrontation had been merely the visible manifestation of a strategy already months in execution. While Natalie and Victor had been planning their betrayal, Damon had been constructing their downfall with the same methodical precision that had built his fortune. His phone buzzed with a notification, a news alert about Victor Hargrove being denied his first parole hearing. Another piece moving exactly